Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the Special Finance and Audit Committee meeting to order for Wednesday, December the 5th, 2018, and begin by recognizing that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today, we're very fortunate to have Ms. Skye Snellgrove with us, and the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Snellgrove.
There are no late items.
Well, we're off to a great start. Motion for approval of the agenda then. Moved by Councillor Martman, seconded by Councillor Brown. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. So we move to presentations, and this morning we're doing a review and wrap-up of the 2019-2023 draft financial plan, to be introduced by Mr. Rudolph, I believe, or Ms. Mercer.
Might as well start right where it belongs.
All right, Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. This morning we're going to give a brief recap of what we've talked about over the last 3 days, and then we will go into discussing some options for change, and then we'll open it up to discussion for council to decide what they want to do.
And will there be decision points made then today? Is that the intent?
That's
any changes?
Intent, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Your Worship, so the goal is, and I think our scheduled timeline is till noon, the goal was to get to a place where you're satisfied with the numbers that are in the plan. If there remains to be issues discussed, we do have the option of next week. We actually have a special meeting on Monday, but it's not on the agenda. We have Finance and Audit on Wednesday. In order to get on the agenda for the following Monday night, 3 readings, we need to pretty well have things tidied up, this week. If not, then we would possibly have to proceed to 3 readings early in the new year. There's just procedural issues there around that. That's all in terms of getting the numbers, depending on the amount of change, if there are changes. So our goal was to the thought that you might be in a position to arrive at a conclusion about the number and if there's items that have been parked, for example. I think the walkway and a couple of other items have been moved to the special committee of the whole on the 17th in the afternoon. That doesn't appear to be affecting the budget number. Mm-hmm. So those are other topics that won't affect the tax rate. So we'll sort that out as we go today and make a determination, I guess, by the end of your morning's deliberations where you think you're at, and if you need more time or if you're satisfied with what we've got, and then we can proceed to do the final documentation for the budget readings on December 17th. So we've got time to do this in more than just this morning is what I'm trying to say, but if we can get it accomplished, it would be good.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Rudolph. I think we hear that message, and we'll see how the morning goes. If there was consensus around the table that we were happy with what we hear and see this morning, at the end of the morning, would a motion to support the draft financial plan be in order?
I think so. I'm not sure what you had contemplated for that, but it would be good then to forward the outcome, make a recommendation as Finance and Audit to Council to approve the budget as submitted.
All right, thank you. Well, we'll see where we end up at the end of the morning. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you. So just like I say, we'll have a couple of slides, just a quick recap of what you've seen in the last couple of days. When we originally presented or compiled the package of the financial plan, it was a 5.03 tax increase for 2019, and by the time we presented it, we had had some updated benefit changes for pension, CPP, and EI and WorkSafe, and that brought it to 5.41. There are some additional increases expected for extended health benefits, but those won't be reflected until the final financial plan is presented to you in the spring. And at this point, we're not quite sure what those increases are going to be. So currently, the revised draft 2019-2023 financial plan is at 5.41% for 2019. As you saw on Monday night with the bylaws for user fees that were brought before council, there was a 4% increase for sanitary sewer for 2019, and for the water user fee increase was 7.5%. And the majority of those were for asset management. And the sanitary user fees are going up to $170 for 2019, which is a $5 increase over 2018. And I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Fulla to go through the budget driver increases for the 5.03 increase, and then the remaining increase to the 5.41 was mainly from WorkSafe premium increases.
Good morning, Council. I just want to recap once again for you the budget drivers. So these are the significant changes to either revenue or expenditures that increase or decrease taxes. So to recap the ones for 2019, we have the $948,000 for the increase to funding to the asset management reserve. And as I said, we're going to be putting $6.6 million in that reserve in 2019. We have $2.5 million in wages and benefits, and this includes the new employer health tax that we've mentioned will be coming into effect in January. And in 2019, of course, we're paying both 50% of the MSP premiums plus the new employer health tax. And we had that $500,000 that we put into reserves from 2017 surplus to help offset the impact of having to pay both. And of course, in 2020, the MSP premiums will disappear. We have that increase in legal fees of $160,000, and as I previously mentioned, $115,000 is a one-time increase, so that is removed from the budget in 2020. We have the increased funding for projects, so an increase of 1.1, bringing us to 6.9, closer to that $7 million target that the 20-year investment plan you saw yesterday was based on. We have the $783,000 for the RCMP contract. So we have funded the contract in 2019 at 92%, which is the same amount that percentage that we are using for 2018. And of course, in 2019, we don't see any increase for those new members. We start to see the tax increase for that in 2020. And I do have a recap slide coming up on that. Then we have snow and ice control. So in the budget, we have operation expenditures for snow and ice control, plus we're also rebuilding those reserves. In 2019, we have a budget impact of $170,000 because council last year chose to fund a portion of the snow and ice control budget from surplus. And I do have a little bit more information on the snow and ice. We're going to give you some items for your consideration, and this is one of the items. Then we have $218,000 for software licenses. We have $243,000 for electric, so BC Hydro. And then we have that front $400,000 for the strategic infrastructure reserve, because as I mentioned, we're going to be in year 3 of the 4-year transition of moving all the casino and Fortis gas revenue over to your new strategic infrastructure reserve. When we look on the revenue side of changes, we have a small decrease in aquatics revenue of $81,000. We have the increase in the building permit revenue of $250,000. We have an increase to investment income of $100,000 due to increased interest rates. We have a decrease in tax penalty revenue because people are paying their taxes on time, or more people are. And then we have a net impact from our transfers from surplus. So you'll see there the $500,000 that's coming in, that was for offsetting EHT, but then it's offset by $50,000. Last year, council used $50,000 of surplus to just cover general expenditures, so now that surplus needs to be replaced by taxation. Then we had other changes that netted out to $268,000, bringing us to a net expenditure increase of just under $6.2 million. From that, we take our estimate for growth at 1.2, which brings us just under $5 million, which brought us to the 5.03. And of course, as Ms. Mercer said, we're currently sitting at 5.41 due to some changes we have made since the original budget binder was prepared for you. Then just recapping the visual here, so you can see that the cost drivers are really wages and benefits, which includes the new employer health tax, the increased contribution to the asset management reserve, project funding, and the RCMP contract. And our biggest offset to our expenditures, of course, is that new growth. So staff has gone back and had a look at the budget. We do have one recommended change that we'd like to suggest to council. We have our preliminary numbers for growth, so that's that non-market change. Based on preliminary numbers, we would like to recommend that we increase our estimate for the non-market change from 1.2 to $1.3 million. Now, we do need to caution you that we will not get the final growth numbers until March, so the preliminary number we've received can go both up or down, so there's always a bit of a risk, but we do feel the 1.3 million is a conservative number still. This would result in a reduction of 0.1% to property taxes. Now, we also have some items that we felt you might want to discuss here today related to the budget to kind of get you started in your deliberations. The first one is project funding levels from general taxation. So as you saw yesterday in our 20-year investment plan, we're targeting $7 million a day. That's what that investment plan was based on. In 2018, the approved funding was $5.8 million, and in the draft budget before you, we have $6.9 million. So this is an increase of $1.1 million or 1.12% for property taxes. So the question really for council is, do you support $6.9 million of general taxation going to projects? If you don't, then we need to know what your target level from general taxation is for projects, and then staff can go back and we can reevaluate projects. It may mean shifting projects out, canceling projects, reducing scope on projects. The other thing we would need to know here, is this a one-time change you want to make to project funding? Because then it does increase your taxes next year, because then the jump will be bigger between 19 and 20 than it currently is, or are you looking to cut project funding across the board, or are you happy with the level?
Thank you, Ms. Fulla. Councillor Armstrong.
Thanks. We heard that the walkway's not affected by this budget, is that correct?
That is correct. Right now, the waterfront walkway, our suggested funding source is for the debt servicing is the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. So if council wanted to reserve decision and pass the provisional budget, we could make changes to that project for final, and it wouldn't impact property taxes with the way it's currently structured.
Okay, thank you.
The second option for council to discuss is the RCMP contract. So the draft plan currently includes 15 new members. Now the final 3 members actually appear in 2024, which is outside this current financial plan, and you will see it next year when we do 2020 to 2024. The estimated property tax increase, I've broken this down by year for you. It is 0.39% in 2020, and then approximately 0.5% a year going forward. Now, you have to keep in mind here, we're budgeting the contract at 93% in 2020 in subsequent years. If Superintendent Miller is successful in filling vacancies, that will change the impact on property taxes. So this is based on assuming we budget at 93%, and we reevaluate that every year based on what the vacancies, how it's trending. So this, you need to keep that in mind when you're looking at this slide here. The next option for council to consider...
Excuse me, Ms. Fulla. I see Councillor Armstrong.
I just wanted to speak to the police option for the simple fact that they're on their union vote right now, and if that passes, we are going to have to increase police staff for sure, based on previous, like other union contracts. So I personally don't think that we should be moving that. I think it needs to be left alone, because otherwise we're going to be hit with a big number in like 2 to 3 years because of what I anticipate being the contract saying that we need more police officers here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but are we asking for 3 more additional RCMP officers because he's having trouble filling his vacancies? Or does he need the 3 plus the fact that he might be able to fill his vacancies?
Through the Chair to Councillor Bonner, the answer is the latter. With the growth in the community, the number of files per officer, and all those factors, his recommendation was to continue to add to the complement. His ask actually was 15, and through discussions, it was smoothed out to move that iteratively over a number of years. So, the vacancy issue is a separate issue, really. It's not driving it, but it's a contributing factor to it. So, separate issues in a way. So the third, that we're playing a bit of financial gymnastics, I guess, if you want to use that word with respect to the 92 or 93. It's a theoretical number, but it's based on practical experience. And the other thing that the chief noted during his presentation, it takes at least 9 months, up to a year actually, to fill a position once it's approved. So if this budget process goes through and their calendar year is end of March to the following year, it's a separate cycle. So it's literally going to be well into 2020 before those positions can be filled in. So both items are relevant, but not necessarily.
And one more, if I may ask, but this particular actually doesn't have any effect whatsoever in the 2019 budget. So this is more theoretical for the next year.
Yeah. Well, the one issue, with the exception of the assumption we're using a 92 versus a 93% vacancy.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Yeah, it's okay. Councillor Bonner just asked my question.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you. Then we're clear. Ms. Fulla.
Moving on to our third point, it's the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. So as I have mentioned, 2019 is the third of the 4-year transition of the casino revenue. So the Fortis gas revenue was fully transitioned in 2017, and we're now in the process of transitioning the casino revenue. This is an impact of $400,000, or approximately 0.4% of property taxes. So an option that council could consider is extending this transition period to 5 years. This means you could look at potentially either reducing or eliminating the additional $400,000 that we were going to move to the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve in 2019 and extending this out into 2021. So a couple things here you need to consider. You could reduce it, you could reallocate that money to another priority, but if we push it out to 2021, it will impact the property tax increase in 2021. So you're just pushing that increase out, but it does give you some flexibility if you have some other priorities that you deem are higher than transitioning these funds over in 2019.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff again. A number of years ago, was the Fortis money just being dropped into general revenue?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, when we originally started getting the Fortis gas money, it did go into general revenue to fund general operations of the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The fifth item for your consideration is that the 2019-2023 draft financial plan is a status quo budget for economic development. So it depends if council wishes to make any changes there.
Just Your Worship,
Yes, Mr.
clarification on that position. So as council is aware, we've scheduled a workshop with council the end of January to review the entire economic development function issue. And out of that, I presume council will want to make some decisions as to how to move forward. But we currently have no additional funding in the budget to accommodate that. That would either be a later in the year budget adjustment or something for 2020. So at this time, there's no additional funding allocated for that in the budget that's being presented, though there is some money, of course, in the A1 position within the planning department that is in that function at this time. So it really would depend on the model that you choose. And even if you made a decision early in the year, it would take some time to get that up and running, be it an in-house department or recruitment for a person or that type of thing. So, or is it acceptable the way it is? So this is a heads up in terms of just a reminder that we actually haven't funded anything in the budget for that function pending a review by council.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. And I know it's been said before several times, but it's worth repeating that any decisions made today do not bind us firmly to this budget. Changes can be made up or down as we move into the new year. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. And through you again, staff, this is more of a process thing. If we pass this budget and we decide after we've had our economic workshops and had a conversation with the community and where we want to proceed with that, we at that time won't really have any money for it. So would we be at that time able to pull money out of, say, a reserve that's over saturated and use it to fund an economic development something without affecting our budget?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, you could pull some money out of reserves. We would not, that would not be something we would recommend because, as it is an operating cost, and that increases taxes in next year or the year after. So it's an option, and that's certainly up to the will of council, but it's not something we recommend using reserves for operating expenses.
So what is their option? What could they do?
There is an option as far as we will, on the December 12th Finance and Audit Committee meeting, we will be bringing you the estimated surplus for the end of the year, and we could put some of that away and not touch any of our current reserves. But again, that can have impacts on future years.
And a couple of questions, just so I can.
A couple.
Sorry. Now I forgot what the question was, all right. If I were to say, I'm just throwing numbers out here, pull, say, 600,000 out of a reserve, but then use that money to extend it over 4 years of $150,000 per year, that would actually be then sort of like an operating fund because it's now been put over 4 years and we just have to worry about it in the 5th year if we continue to wish to fund it. So that would have less of an impact on the budget,
That's
correct?
correct, yes.
I'm just trying to figure out how this thing works.
Done, Councillor Bonner?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Since we're in discussions on changes, I think we should leave things status quo for this year and let our staff and everybody work together with the business communities to find out exactly which way they want to go, and then look at funding this position in the 2020 cycle, because there may be a recommendation that they want 2 or 3 individuals, and, so I think we'd be best, in my opinion, waiting until we have that engagement. I mean, it has been working well the way it is with MIBI and everybody else, leaving Amrit in the position until we can really find out what the community wants and then budget for it in the next cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
I concur with Councillor Armstrong, especially because there seems to be a lot of moving parts with motions on the books at the regional district level as well around economic development. So there's a lot of considerations, and I know there's been a lot of chatter of, is it a regional function, is it a local function, and how does that play out? So I think there's a lot of legwork and conversations that need to happen before we will be even in a position to sort of say, what is the model moving forward and where and how is it funded?
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrock?
Through the chair, am I on? I'm on.
Yes, you're on.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, through the chair, I agree with Councillor Brown and Councillor Armstrong on that. So more deliberations in the new year.
Thank you. Seeing nobody else at the moment, Ms. Fulla.
Moving on to slide number 5 is asset management. Of course, we have that increase to our asset management reserve this year of $948,000, which, as I mentioned, is going to make our contribution to the reserve $6.6 million. Of course, council does have the option of adjusting that 1%. However, the 1% was a recommendation of our 20-year investment plan, and making changes to that 1% would impact our project plan. It would actually force staff to go back and reprioritize projects because any change in that funding, it's cumulative, the impact of that. But of course, that is always council's decision, and this is something that you could look at, but you do need to understand the long-term ramifications of changing that. And, it likely is better to wait till we do our next asset management update to make any changes. But of course, it is one of our budget drivers and something that council can look at. The next one is our SNCC reserves. So our snow and ice reserves, we're in the process of rebuilding. We have 2 of them, and part of our reserve policy will look at combining these. At the end of 2017, they both had a 0 balance due to the winter that we had in 2016. Effective 2018, we are working on rebuilding these reserves. We're contributing $275,000 between the 2 of them a year, $200,000 to engineering and public works and $75,000 to parks and rec. We're targeting a balance of $900,000 in the engineering and public works one by the end of 2022 and $300,000 in the park and rec one by the end of 2021. Now, this has an impact on property taxes, so $275,000 is about a 0.28% impact. So council could look at extending the timeline for rebuilding these reserves. It's really a matter of the risk tolerance you have. You probably wouldn't want to take that 275 down to 0, but you may want to reduce it and extend it another year. The risk there, of course, is that we have another winter like we did in 2016 and require those funds.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. The staff is recommending basically an overall budget of 1.2 million or amount in that reserve. Having looked over the reserve for all the years that I can find on the city's website, it was never more than 400,000. Why is the suggestion for 1.2 million?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Bonner. So the engineering and public works one generally had a balance of 400,000. The Parks and Rec one, 100,000 prior to us using the funds after the winter of 2016. The new analysis, after the winter of 2016, we went back and did a 10-year analysis, and those balances are based on 10-year worst-case scenario that we would be able to handle a worst-case scenario without fully draining our reserves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on. The next is the 7 positions that we added to the draft budget. So all these positions are currently in the draft plan before you. Just to recap them once again for you, in city administration, we have that manager of communications position with a 0.14% property tax increase. In public safety, we had 2 bylaw enforcement officers. One was part of the hospital area parking strategy, and this position would be funded from parking revenues, overall city parking revenues, so not anticipated to have an impact on property taxes, although this position would require us to buy an additional vehicle for the bylaw department, and that vehicle would be funded from property taxes, so that's where the 0.03 comes from. The second officer would be based on Victoria Road at the CPSO office. They would be funded from taxation because there would be a big security component of their position, and it is 0.09, the impact on property taxes. In community development, we have an administrative support position at 0.08. Engineering and Public Works has 2 positions, a parking and street use coordinator at 0.11, and then a Public Works clerk dispatcher. And of course, as I mentioned, our front office staff at Public Works, they support all our utilities, sewer, water, drainage, transportation. So a portion of the front office is charged out to the sewer and water funds, 24%, and the balance would be funded from property taxation, so an impact of that position of 0.08. And then in Parks and Rec, we have the Special Events Coordinator at 0.10. And of course, all these positions were supported by business cases prepared by the departments. And then of course, I'll just point out again for you, the 2 other changes that we made were the additional hours for marina maintenance workers to comply with new technical safety BC requirements as a result of the incident in Fernie. And then we did add a 4-month planning co-op student in community development. The budget also...
Sorry, Ms. Fulla, Councillor Turley.
So, thank you, Chair, through to the staff. So the positions such as the Chief Financial Officer and the other positions that apparently are vacant now, that's in addition to all this, or is that in the...
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, yes, those positions are already in the budget, so they're not additions. They already sit in the budget.
Perfect, thanks.
Good, thank you.
Also in the budget in future years, we have 2 positions in engineering and public works for refuse collectors. So this ties to that automated truck we're going to purchase in 2019. That'll go into service in January 2020. We're doing short-term borrowing for the purchase of that truck. That is to add new routes due to growth. This will impact the annual budget for sanitation. We'll have debt servicing costs, we'll have staffing for the additional route, and we'll have an annual fleet allocation, and this will all be funded from sanitation user fees. And then in 2022, we're targeting to add another route, so another driver and truck for July of 2020. This will also be short-term borrowing for the truck as it's an addition to our fleet. And 2022, sorry. And we will have 6 months of debt servicing costs in 2022, staffing and annual fleet allocation, so that's an impact of about $134,000 in 2022. And then in 2023, we will have full staffing for that new position. And all of this is funded from sanitation user rates, and this is included in the sanitation 5-year projection that Ms. Mercer went over in the earlier slide. And then the final items for your consideration are other positions that business cases were prepared for and directors mentioned when they did their business plan presentations last week, but these are not currently in the budget. So we had 3 positions in corporate services. We had a buyer, which would have an impact of about 0.1%. We had an IT client support specialist, so this is working on our help desk, but of course they do more than just answer the phone and answer your IT questions. That has an impact of 0.08%. We had a temporary GIS technologist position for 1 year. That was a 0.10% projected property tax increase. Then in community development, we had 2 positions. We had an engineering development technician at 0.09, a planner at 0.11. Then engineering and public works had a number of positions, including an active and sustainable transportation coordinator, 0.11% impact, the asset management specialist at 0.14, and this ties back to when we were talking yesterday about the risk framework. That would be part of this position, is rolling that out further. Then we had the manager of utilities at 0.17%. We had 2 project engineers at 0.14% each, and then we had the recycling and policy advisor. So this position would not actually impact property taxes because it'd be funded from sanitation user fees, and the impact would be quite small because we would use the funding in the budget currently for the 3 Rs contract to help pay for this position, and then there's always, of course, the potential that we could go to the RDN and look at some sort of cost share on this position. That is something we could explore.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Another question through you to staff. When we were presented the business case, these were just add-ons at the end. Is there a business case to suggest that some of these positions might actually save the city more money than they're actually costing? Like, as an example, maybe the buyer has the ability to actually save on purchasing by coordinating it between all the departments, and we actually are ahead of money at the end of the year.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, the buyer, adding another buyer position would definitely add capacity to the purchasing department, so they would have more opportunity, the manager would have more opportunity to work on improvements to the purchasing policy. So that is an option clearly for that one. Yes, it provides them more capacity to do more than just day-to-day operations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
So following on what Councillor Bonner had stated earlier, when we're looking at that temporary GIS technologist, and I understand you never want to do operating costs from reserves, but because that is only for a year, would it be possibility that there is a reserve fund that could be used to fund that position where it wouldn't have the impact on taxes? And because it's just a year, we don't have to worry about continuing operating costs?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, yes, a situation like that, we could use, say, allocated surplus for a 1-year position, and then it doesn't affect future years.
And just, if I may further, through you to staff again, what would your professional opinion be on that, doing that? Like, does it have a huge impact, or is it okay?
That is certainly something you could do for sure. Okay. And it wouldn't, like I say, it wouldn't impact.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So a couple more slides of new positions. In Parks and Recreation, they had 2 positions that were not included in the draft budget. One was an allocations clerk. Now, the impact there you're seeing is 0.03%. And the reason that it seems so small is they actually budget right now for backfill for their allocation clerks. And so what their business case proposed doing was replacing that backfill coverage with a full FTE. So the cost of doing that was quite minimal. In parks, we had more custodians for our parks, so the field, we call them field houses, the washrooms in the park. We had 1 permanent full-time staff member and 1 seasonal. A seasonal, we were talking about April 1st through October 31st. The impact of this is 0.16%, but we would be required to purchase an additional vehicle if we added these positions, so that would have a 0.04% impact, but that'd be a one-time only impact for the 0.04. And then in public safety, of course, they did ask for one more bylaw officer than made the draft plan, and so the impact of that is the same as the other one, 0.09. Now, I have a special slide here for the fire department, because as I mentioned before, when we look at firefighters, they have a stepped increase, and it goes up quite significantly in the first few years. So with this one, it's better to look at the full 5-year impact of the position. Now, the other thing to note here, too, is they do have projected savings. So while adding 4 career firefighters does have some costs, there's also some savings. They anticipate they can reduce overtime as well as their on-call budget. So we're looking at impact in 2019 of 0.16%, and that's based on the firefighters starting in June. Then in subsequent years, we got 0.12%, 0.05, 0.02, and then 0.05.
Let's see, we have a couple
sorry.
of questions. Councillor Armstrong is first.
Just looking at this, when we're looking at it from a public safety perspective, I think I heard the chief say, like, there's certain standards that have to be met. Are we meeting those standards now, or are we going to anticipate that we're going to need more in the near future? Thanks, Chief Fry.
Am I on?
Yes.
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, we are currently not meeting our standards as appointed by our designated by council on the arrival of the first in. We're sitting somewhere, I believe, around 78% instead of 90% of the arrival of the first unit within 6 minutes to emergency incidents. We are meeting it for structure fires. For a full alarm assignment, which is 3 apparatus on scene within 10 minutes, we are meeting that standard. But as far as the arrival of the first in unit, we are actually slipping a little bit.
Follow up, if I may. Is there an impact on overtime on your firefighters, as we see in the police with the extra work and you know, even like I'm looking at the mental health and well-being?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, correct. What we heard from the RCMP is that they can pull in resources from other communities. We can't. The fire department's fully impacted through our own staff. We don't do callback from other jurisdictions. So what we are seeing is we are having a lot of overtime, which then creates more sick time, unfortunately, through cumulative responses. Specifically, we're seeing this across the province with motor vehicle accidents, opioid crisis, and situations such as that that are impacting the mental health. We probably have, as we indicated earlier, with the WorkSafe claims going up, we potentially have, I'm going to throw out there, 5 employees off right now on mental health or stress-related injuries.
And then that has to be backfilled by overtime, so I think the 4 is good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Through the chair, just a point of clarification on the addition of new firefighters in that table. Is there 2 added in 2019 and then another 2 added in 2020? Like, is it stepped addition, or is it like all 4 right away and then increase?
Through the chair to Councillor Geselbrecht, it's all 4 starting in approximately June of 2019. Recruitment would take some time to get staffing up. But there are options as well. If council decided that 4 at one time was not within their ability, there's opportunities to hire 2 or 1 at a time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turley, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, through to staff. So the increase in the fire budget, does that include anticipation of the negotiations that will be taking place later this year?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. So the contract does not does not end until the end of 2019, so any negotiations would begin most likely in 2020 and probably not be signed until after, quite some time after that.
Thank you. And Councillor Martman.
Thank you, through the chair and to whomever can answer. So, for instance, in the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, where the impact's 0.40%, if we were, because if I remember right, it was 0.16% to hire the firefighters was the impact? Um, 0.16. So if we amended that and just took it down, so then you could half it even, so that it was, I would assume, 200,000 instead of the 400,000, then that could be offset with safety.
Through to the chair, to council, yes, correct, it would be. The only thing to keep in mind is then we would move 200,000 into 2021 for the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, so we would have an impact to the budget in 2021. And you will still have some impact of adding those firefighters in future years because of their costs going up. So you're offsetting the cost in the first year, but you will increase property taxes in future years because as they move up the scale, it does increase our costs, so we have to collect more property taxes to fund them, but it is definitely an option.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Mr. Rudolph.
The Chair, procedurally, just a recommendation on how to handle this. I'd suggest you go back to slide 1 and review it and make a decision whether you're a motion of some sort, either to support it or not, or whatever the appropriate motion is on that, and then move on to the next slide and give some mechanism to discuss and decide. And there's also a 10th slide that's not on there, which would be other. So that might be one mechanism to work our way through this. And the other thing, as we do this, if you choose to do that, we need to kind of have a rolling number of where the tax rate lies as a result of those decisions. So I'm assuming we can.
I have a staff member in the back.
We have the person in the back room that can keep us up to date on that if you wish. So it's one mechanism to work our way through each of the issues. You kind of did that a little bit with ECDEV, but we need to kind of, I was asking Sheila if we should try to have motions on each of these, and she felt she would recommend a motion for each of these items if that's a process that you accept.
And that was exactly the process I was going to suggest. So thank you, and I appreciate staff's work in organizing this very clearly for us. We can work our way through these 8 or 9 topics and see where we end up. Councillor Bonner.
Chair, and through you to staff, this may be a hard one to answer right away, but I wouldn't mind knowing it eventually, is how much money for this budget, this year's budget, are we putting into reserves totally for the entire city?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. That is a tough question, but we will try to do some number crunching for you and get that number today.
Councillor Geselbrock.
Through the chair to staff, I'm just curious, with the 20-year investment plan, that increase in $1 million, like, is the $7 million target sort of what the plan requires to make sure that our infrastructure is refurbished, in this longer asset management strategy? Like, what would be the impacts of keeping it at the 2018 levels for this year, and then incrementally increasing it to the $7 million? Like, would it just slow down the rate of us getting to that, accomplishing that plan?
So, sorry, Councillor Geselbrock, if I may interject before Ms. Fulla answers that question. Is council okay with this process of working through each slide and debating each one and ending up with a motion for each one? Because I sense that's what we're starting to do here, Councillor Brown. So if we're good with that.
You're already forgiven.
Take it as a compliment.
He is pretty good looking.
It's okay, Ms. Fuller. You see, you're not the only one who makes mistakes. All right, so if we're okay with that process, then we can start debating on number one, which is where I think you're going, Councillor Geselbrecht. All right?
Sorry, do you mind just outlining that process again, just so I feel like I fully understand it?
Sure. So all we're suggesting, Councillor Brown, is that we go through each of these recommendations or slides one at a time, discuss their merits, and end up with a motion on each one to accept, modify, reject, whatever. And staff at the same time will be keeping a rolling total of how that affects our budget so that we can have updated information. All right? So,
Sorry.
Ms.
Thank you.
Gurry,
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you. So I would recommend you actually get a motion on the floor and then have it seconded and then have it discussed and debated, the merits of it, et cetera, and then go from there rather than discuss it, then come up with the motion.
That's an
if that
excellent
was-
idea, thank you. I totally agree. So if we're okay with that process, everybody, and I'm sorry to interrupt your question, Councillor Geselbrecht, we'll start with slide one, or recommendation one. Could we get a motion on the floor first, and then I'll entertain Councillor Geselbrecht's question and other debate?
I move to follow the process of going through each of the budget sections one by one and debating each one as a process to
All right.
deliberate.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion on the process? So I'll call the question then on the process of going through each slide. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So now on slide number one, or proposal number one, I'd like a motion first before we get into debate. I think that will help guide our discussion. So is somebody prepared to make a motion regarding number one? I have a list of speakers. I'm not sure if it's to make a motion or not. Councillor Turley, then?
Yes, I would like to move that we accept the third point, the 2019 draft funding at $6.5 million.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Discussion? Sorry, I'm gonna clear the queue because we interrupted Councillor Geselbrecht, and we have to deal with this motion now before we can get back to him. So it's moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Brown.
Yes, I just have one question about something. On page 45, it's the Regional Emission Reduction Statutory Reserve. So I understand it is statutory. It has 85,000 going into it. Does that come from just a general taxation, like the 85,000 contribution?
Just 1 second and we'll tell you exactly where it comes from.
I'm trying to think what it's called.
It is part of the agreement that we've signed with, I think there's 4 other municipalities in the regional district. So I believe that it comes from the general taxation, but I'll have to confirm that 100% for you.
Thank you. And could you also confirm if we actually have to contribute?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht, and my apologies, we're finally back to you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. To staff, just curious the impacts of not increasing from the 2018 funding levels for projects in terms of the effect of accomplishing the 20-year infrastructure renewal and such. Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor Geselbrecht. So actually there'd be, to me, 3 impacts of not increasing the funding. So one, then we are not closing the gap the way we anticipated in our 20-year investment plan, because that was based on $7 million a year from taxation funding projects. The second impact will be, if you reduce the funding, staff will have to go back and revisit the project plan and either reprioritize, potentially cancel projects, reduce rescope or move projects out, because we cannot fund the draft project plan before you without the $6.9 million. We would have to make changes to the project plan. The third impact is if you reduce it for 2019 only, then you're pushing that property tax increase into 2020. So you're now pushing that into the next year, or you're looking at reducing the funding for projects across the board.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Excuse me, through you to staff, would it be fair to say that that's what's happened in the past few years, that we haven't kept up with those dollars, which has now put us in a position where we have to raise the taxes to go back to what we need to do?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong. So our provisional budget for 2017-2021 did have the funding level at $7 million. For provisional, it was, or for final, that was reduced down. Last year, it was reduced down further for the provisional budget. So yes, now we're playing catch up. We used to be at that $7 million level. So if we wish to restore that, yes, it's impacting property taxes. But of course, it's always the question of what level council supports for property taxation for projects, and any changes to that do impact the infrastructure gap we have, and then we'd have to look at other strategies for closing that gap.
Thank you. I do agree with the increases, because I think we have to build those funds back up or we're going to be in trouble. And I think it's important. I'm prepared to agree to that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I don't seem to have in this document that was given to us the projects that we're funding. Is that in one of the tabs, or is it a separate document?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So in your package here, there is a page that does show the funding sources. It is page 28 under tab 1. Page 28. So we don't show the funding source by project, because really this is a question of what level of taxation council supports for projects. We wouldn't want you eliminating a project from the plan just because it's funded from general taxation, because projects can be funded from multiple different sources. So you give us a level that you're willing to support, and then we work within that level. And then we fund less or more from reserves. It's a balancing and a funding strategy that we use in financial planning. Now, that doesn't mean you can't remove projects. If you feel a project, you don't want to support it and you don't want to move forward with it, we could remove that project and say, for example, it was funded from general taxation, then what we would do would move that funding to another project and preserve our reserves for the future, because that's all part of our 20-year investment plan. So you can make changes to the projects, but you shouldn't make it based on where the project was funded from. Your decision really should be based on the level of funding you support for projects from general taxation.
Thank you. I'm seeing no other speakers at this point. No? So we have a motion on the floor, which is to support bullet point 3 there, which is draft funding for 2019 of 6.9 million, funding increase for 2019 of 1.1 million, impact on property taxes 1.12%. I will comment, if I may, that in my campaign, I supported restoring staffing levels as much as possible and moving projects forward that had been stalled. Those were my words, and I still stand by that. So I will be supporting this. Are there any other speakers before I call the question? Councillor Bonner.
Is the, thank you, Chair, through you to staff, is the Port One Place work that we're doing part of this thing we're voting on right now?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, no, that project is in 2018, the one that we were discussing. There's 600,000 for the drainage piece in 2019, but the rest is in 2028. Correct, Mr. Sims? Yes. Or 2018, sorry, 2028. Sorry about that. No, the budget is in 2018, except for $600,000 that's being added in 2019 for for storm drainage main.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So with no other speakers then, I will call the question on this motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So we'll move to slide or suggestion number 2, RCMP contract increase. And again, I would prefer to speak to a motion. Councillor Armstrong?
I would like to make a motion that we increase the RCMP contract to include 50 new members, 3 per year over a 5-year period commencing 2020 to 2024.
Seconded by Councillor Brown. Thank you. Discussion on this. I think I just canceled you. Councillor Bonner. I'll reinstate you. I'll even turn on your microphone. There you go.
Even better. I'm going to vote in favor of this motion because I believe that the last council made a mistake by not increasing the RCMP when they should have back then. And I think our current situation is reflective of that change that should have taken place but didn't. So I'll be in favor of this.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer, are you on?
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up with Councillor Brown's question. And the agreement states that parties would transfer into a reserve fund the amount equal to the total quantity of local government emissions generated in a calendar year. So the agreement or the memorandum of understanding is that each of the parties would transfer into a reserve an amount equal to the emissions generated in a calendar year. It doesn't say, it says that they would transfer in, that's part of the agreement. There's not a set amount, but. And just and clarification on the amount going into the reserve, it's 76,000 would be the amount transferred into that reserve, and 11,000 is interest earned on that money in that reserve.
Yeah, we're actually dealing with a separate motion. I'll allow this because it's information that you requested, but if we can deal with it quickly because we're in the middle of a motion.
Sure. Thank you. So would your advice be that we have to do that, right? Because I guess my question is, we're putting money into for projects that are unknown when we could be using that for projects that could actually reduce emissions now. That's not.
Yeah, I would recommend that you continue to put money into that reserve as when there is an agreement on a project, the money will be there to fund. And that would be, I hope I answered your question.
So we could do that January.
Okay, thank you. So council, we digressed there a little bit, and I allowed it. I probably shouldn't have. But we're back onto our motion now regarding our CMP contract increase. It's been moved and seconded. Councillor Turley, you wish to speak to it?
Yes, I would like to, Chair. So the question I have is one of, I'm a bit confused, and I probably wasn't listening. The RCMP contract increase under the draft of $783,000. Can somebody explain to me again what that is, please?
Ms. Fulla.
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. The $783,000, that is the impact in 2019, and that is just the cost of the contract increase. So we get our contract from E-Division, they send us the pricing for the contract, and so they have increase in their costs, potential wage increases, they have all kinds of increases, they do a budget, and that 783 ties to that. So, and just to let you know, so when we did the pricing for the impact of the members here, we actually go to E-Division and they price it out for us.
Okay, so basically there's no negotiation or conditions that we can change here. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I just want to speak that I'm in favor of the motion. I think public safety is paramount, and we're a city that's growing, so I think this is the right thing for us to do.
Thank you, and I see no other speakers, so I will simply echo your thoughts, Councillor Markman. I totally agree. Seeing no other speakers, I'm going to call the question on this motion. It's moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Ms. Fulla.
Through to the chair, I'm just wondering if you would like to make a motion regarding our change from 1.2 million to 1.3 million. It is a staff recommended change to the budget, but it would change the property tax rate. So I don't know if you would like to make a motion or have any discussion around this, just to follow the process you are for the other points.
And that was the slide prior to suggestion number 1, am I correct?
Yes, that's why
So-
I kind of got missed, because this was a staff recommended change versus points for your discussion. But, I mean, of course, this is a recommendation from us, so I thought you might want to discuss it or make a motion just to follow process here.
Thank
that
you.
you're doing for your
So
other slides.
so we'll back up to this one. Sorry, I'm hearing some sidebars.
It's not actual money.
Sorry, everybody. Could we just have one meeting? We're going to back up to this slide. Everybody is familiar with its suggestion. I'd entertain a motion to support it or not, and then we can debate it.
I'll support that we do the growth non-market change and the revised estimate for growth with the increase to the 1.3 million. And with the reduction of the 0.10%, I think number one, it's hopefully accurate, and number two, it at least shows us conscious of wanting to keep the property taxes reasonable. So it may be a small percentage, but it's still us doing what I believe is the right thing again.
Thank you. So that is your motion. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I spoke to the motion.
Yes, somewhat. And I'm hearing Councillor Hemmons seconding the motion. Thank you. So it's now on the floor. Did you wish to add anything else, Councillor Martin? Councillor Turley.
No, I was just going to make the motions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I hope we have conversation to actually go into depth around what we would like to see in the budget as well. But I don't actually think adopting this motion shows that we're being conscious of the budget. It's just a matter of fact. The facts changed and now we have more money to work with. So I hope we do have more robust conversation about the budget drivers, and I'm happy to support this because it is just a fact, and it might be subject to change.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this motion? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. So now we're skipping back down to number 3 on our slide, Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. There was an option for us to consider, which was extending transition period to 5 years. I won't read it again. I don't think that's necessary, but I'll entertain a motion to accept, modify, or reject. Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I'd like to make, excuse me, a motion to extend the transition period of the Fortis, is it the Fortis gas revenue? Or is it no, casino revenue to reserve for a 5-year period. I'd like to increase that, extend the transition, which would then give us more money to work with.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Martman and Ms. Fulla. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm that it's the full option up there, and that Councillor Armstrong would like the full $400,000 extended to the 5 years, because there was an option of adjusting that amount.
That's correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, so if you want the full motion like that, that's what my motion is. Thank you.
And Councillor Martman, you're seconding that motion. All right, just so we're clear.
Can I speak to?
Okay, thank you. Did you wish to speak to it, Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I did. I think the, doing the impact of the 400%, that is a 0.4% decrease in taxes, which I think is important right now, because I do think we're going to have a high tax bill. And contrary to what some people think, I did campaign saying that taxes would increase, because I believe that they've been artificially low. So, but I think this is a way that we could take away some of the sting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to relook at their strategic infrastructure reserve and the money that's going into it and what it's being used for. So but I'm just not quite sure when we do that, because I would probably like to see this thing gone and money's being reallocated to other things. But that's just my opinion. I just don't know what to do with this motion as it is.
And I guess if I may, I'd suggest that that's certainly a conversation that can be had in the weeks and months ahead, but for now it's part of our budget and we need to decide what to do with it. So I'll go to Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair, to the staff. So my recollection is this money was initially granted to the city on a yearly basis to look after issues resulting from gambling addictions, et cetera. Is that basically being taken off the table, or is there still anything in the books that indicate it needs to be used for that? I'm going back a few years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the intent of the money. And we had funded certain things out of it in the past. We didn't put it into an infrastructure reserve when we used some of that money for operations. So that's kind of the history. We had it in operating budgets before.
No, but we don't have any contractual obligations to, okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair, and through to staff. My understanding is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong because we've taken in a lot of information over the last couple of days, that the Strategic Reserve Fund would be used to cover debt financing in future years for projects. Was that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Brown. So currently, there's actually a few things being funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. So if council changes, like decides they want to eliminate the reserve or something, there is impacts, because right now we're actually funding 2 projects, and you're correct, some debt servicing. So right now we're funding our property acquisition, so the $600,000 a year for property acquisition is funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. We have $300,000 a year for our pedestrian improvements unallocated, where staff will bring some projects to council and they can add a pedestrian improvement project to the budget. That's a priority for them. And then the debt servicing for the waterfront walkway. If we did long-term borrowing for the waterfront walkway, our suggestion was that the borrowing be repaid from this reserve.
Just to follow up.
Yes.
Was that borrowing, did that kick in 2020? Was that?
The borrowing would kick in 2019 if
Okay.
we proceeded with the project in 2019, and then it kind of ramps up because the borrowing occurs over multiple years as we move through the different phases of the waterfront walkway.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. So looking at the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, we're putting basically in 2019 $2.4 million in it, and then we're up in it to 2.8, and that carries on for years and years. But that also builds up this fund to a point at the end of our 5-year budget of $5.6 million. So if we were to just not put that $400,000 into this fund, we wouldn't affect any of the projects that we have that are being funded by this fund, and we could just put that money back into general reserves like it used to be and drop our taxes by 0.4%. Am I correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, not exactly, because once the full borrowing is done for the waterfront walkway, based on current interest rates, which of course will change because we're looking at borrowing over multiple years, but we're projecting that debt servicing cost would be about $3 million. So it would actually exceed your contributions to the reserve each year. That's why we're building up the balance in the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. So we have those savings for when the outflows, just for the debt alone, and that's not including the $600,000 a year we fund for property acquisition or the $300,000 for the other project. I mean, combined, you're looking at more money than you're putting in there. So there, if you Doing the 400,000 and extending it to 2021 doesn't impact the long-term plan there, but if you cut it out forever, then yes, eventually we're going to have to start funding things that are funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve from general taxation. The other thing to keep in mind is there's no guarantee on casino revenues. The casino could disappear from our community tomorrow. It can change with the economy. Those revenues can increase, they can also decrease, and the same can be said for the Fortisgas. Those are not guaranteed amounts, so we use conservative estimates, but they can change.
Thank you, Ms. Fulla. I see no other speakers. Does anybody wish further comment? Mr. Rudolph.
Mr. Mayor, I think the subject of fiscal management and reserves being part of that is a major workshop for committee of the whole, or governance and priorities, or however we're dealing with it. But I would suggest that we earmark this as a discussion for the new year and spend as much time as we need to unpack all the reserves, understand that, and properly get our head around that, so that moving forward, you're in a better position for next year's budget. I agree with your comment that this year we are working within an existing situation, and it's possibly awkward and troubling in some ways without a full picture, but there will be plenty of opportunity after we enter the new year to work our way through all the big picture fiscal issues and to maybe redesign that or keep it the way it is. So I would say that we park it for a committee of the whole or finance and audit sometime in the new year.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. I personally agree with your comments, and I think that would be a very valuable workshop for council in the near future. I'm seeing no other speakers on this motion. I'll just comment then that I will be supporting it, and I think property acquisition is an important component of this. So I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? And I'm seeing Councillor Bonner, Councillor Brown, and Councillor Hemmons opposed. Motion passes. Thank you, everybody. On to number 4, economic development. No, maybe not. It's, yes. Yeah, we need to kickstart the economy. So, a motion regarding economic development service delivery model changes. Councillor Hemmons.
I would move that the 2019-2023 draft financial plan remain a status quo budget for ECDEV.
Seconded by Councillor Bonner. Councillor Turley, I'm sorry, I think I skipped over you.
That's okay, I'm used to it. I took his chair yesterday at lunch, so he's trying to he's got a long memory. I just want to clarify on this motion, you're saying nothing in the budget for the economic development for the whole 5 years?
No.
I thought I heard you said 2019 to 23.
That's a great catch. I meant for the 2019 budget,
Thank you.
right?
And I
Following on
think-
that more fulsome conversation in
So
January.
I guess the two have to agree that that's the case?
Yeah, and I certainly think that was the intent of the recommendation and the motion. So Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Bonner, you're in agreement with that interpretation? It's for the 2019 budget?
Sure, okay. I'm going to talk about it, but yeah.
All right.
Just to get it talking.
So Councillor Turley, are you done? Can I cancel you, or?
I just want to make one other comment about it. I'm in agreement with just for the 1 year, because I believe it's going to take some time for consultation to determine what the best route is. I don't believe we should rush into this, but I'm confident we'll be ready for the 2020 budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. And I was just going to add that even though this is a 5-year, 4-year budget, we're probably going to do another budget next year. And I fully hope and expect that by midsummer, we'll have an economic something that is funded, and we'll just carry on from there. So I didn't make any difference to me, but so.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
I just wanted to echo Councillor Turley. I think this is one of those things that we could possibly hold over for a year as we have organizations like MIBI doing this great work. And I'd like to see a kind of a thorough consultation process to make sure that when we do something around economic development, that we do it well and that it fits with the community, it fits with our vision. So I'm obviously in favor because I made the motion.
All right, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a general question, but maybe staff can also answer it, is, if we are to proceed with discussions around a model, do we need some money in the budget for hosting events with stakeholders and whatnot, in terms of just getting people at the table, or is that sort of a cost?
Mr. Rudolph?
Question, we have, under the Office of the CAO, there is some budget for consulting, a small amount. If we're on the subject of public engagement and consultation, I'm not sure we would, that this would be the only topic that you may want to do that on. So that's a great comment, but in terms of providing some clarity on how we would fund that, I mean, maybe if we take a break somewhere along the line, we could go back and look into that and give a more wholesome answer to you. But the answer is, I'm advised, there's limited budget currently on the subject of engagement on this or any other topic for that matter, but it would be built into projects for the OCP and some of those major things, but as a general piece, no, there may not be. It depends on how robust that engagement process is, what you're envisaging for that. But this would be only one of possibly other topics that you might want to do that for.
Good comment, thank you. Councillor Geselbrandt.
Through the chair, just following up on Councillor Brown's comment there, I do think that we need to make sure that there is some money set aside for these conversations. I'm definitely envisioning with a variety of different community stakeholder groups, some forms of roundtables in conjunction while we're developing our committee structure and engaging folks in that way. And I would like to make sure that there's enough money to be able to facilitate that. And I know that there's some funds supporting the old committee structure in the council strategic initiatives, but if we could have some eyes on that to make sure that there's something there for that process. Thank you.
Thank you. And those are points well worth making note of. Ms. Mercer?
We can come back with some options for you for that. Like you could take some of the $400,000 from the strategic infrastructure fund, reserve fund, and put that aside earmark that for some consultation.
Mr. Chair, I would recommend that we maybe recess briefly at this time, not complete item 4, and we could come back with a better answer for you if you took 10 minutes, and we could go back and look at our budget and give you a better answer on that. But the scope of the subject matter that you mentioned in terms of engagement is broader than just on this topic, but it was germane to this topic. So that's an important issue that we want to make sure we're clear on, and what funding sources exist in the council budget envelope for that type of thing, and maybe other areas. I mentioned the OCP, the Parks and Rec and Culture, and any specific projects would have budgeted amounts in there for consultation. We're not talking about, but we're talking more generally speaking on other topics. And there's different ways to facilitate engagement on this subject, which may or may not involve a lot of expense. It depends on how big that is, if it's meetings, if it's facilitators and renting halls and stuff, but we can find ways to economize on that at the same time. So, but if we just spent 5 minutes going back to looking at that, and we could possibly show you on the screen what our budget envelopes are available for that, that would probably be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. So we're coming up close to break time anyway. Your suggestion is we take the break now and give you time to deal. I realize that. Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Chair. There's two ways. Preferably, we would deal with the motion on the floor before a recess, though Mr. Rudolph is making excellent points, though I think it would be a subsequent motion to the one that's actually on the floor. So currently, the motion on the floor is to keep status quo for 2019 for economic development, and then look at it again and after consultation, et cetera, for the 2020 budget. So I think if if the Finance and Audit Committee would like to vote on the current motion, a subsequent motion as to funding for consultation and those types of things could come after that and after staff have had a chance to look at our budgets for that. That's just a suggestion. However, council could do whatever.
Thank you. And I have a list of speakers. I'm going to suggest that I agree with your comment, Ms. Gurry, and I know that Mr. Rudolph wants some time to think about this, but I think the motion on the floor is specific to economic development, and the other topic is related but more general in terms of public consultation and where we get funding for that. So I would prefer to deal with this motion if that's agreeable to council. So we'll proceed with this and then take our break after a decision is made. So I have Ms. Mercer. Did you wish to speak? Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Nope, you covered it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Turley.
Yes, I was just looking at Appendix A under the council initiative reserves, and can money from that reserve be used for initiatives like trying to determine whether economic development in what format it could be, or does it have to be a capital project?
Sorry, what reserve were you?
There's under council strategic, council initiative reserves, there's over $5 million in it on page 43. Appendix A.
Council initiative reserves. So there's a housing legacy reserve is in there, sustainability initiatives, regional emissions, strategic infrastructure, and strategic partnership reserves.
They could fund for the strategic infrastructure reserve.
There is some money in the strategic infrastructure reserve that you could use some money in there. There is a bit.
Yep, we could accommodate that.
We should go back.
So I'm going to suggest that.
Yeah. Before you
that-
select anything, I think we should probably have a look and see what we have.
Thank you. And again, I think that's part of the discussion that staff will have during the
I realize
recess
that.
and not directly related to this motion.
And I need a definition of initiative.
Councillor Turley, are you?
Yeah, my
Done
concern
there?
is the definition of initiatives, and obviously they're going to find that out, so.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
I just want to make a point. We do have an ECDev person, and she does have a budget, so I think we're jumping the gun here till we can look at what her budget is. I think, like was stated, there's a different motion, but we're all forgetting the position does exist with a budget attached to it. Thank you.
Good point. I see no other speakers, so I'm going to call the question on this motion. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody, and we'll have a further discussion and conversation regarding funding sources for community involvement. I'm going to suggest now is a good time for a 10-minute break, and we'll resume at, let's say, 10:40. Thank you. Okay, council, like to reconvene, please. Thanks, everybody. We'll reconvene our Finance and Audit Committee meeting. And Ms. Mercer, you have a slide up. Did you wish to speak to that?
Just to give an update, so what we've done is every time you, as a council, make a change to adding things or taking them out of the budget, we're adjusting the tax rate so you can see what the impact of those changes are. So with the two changes that we've made so far, the increasing the growth number and removing the funding to the strategic infrastructure reserve of 400,000, that has dropped the revised draft rate to 4.91% approximately. Because until we get in and tinker with the system, it's approximate. Yeah.
Thank you. So as we speak, there's a man behind the curtain pulling levers. And
That is correct, and his name is Adam. Yeah.
That's perfect, that's exactly what we need.
Yeah.
All right. So as we work our way through the proposed topics, we were down to suggestion number 5. Are we going to pick it up there?
They're just gonna, you were looking at my Excel workbook there, not a fancy slide, so they have to switch back to the presentation.
There we are. So regarding asset no, we've lost it.
They go in, no, they won't.
There we are again. Asset management, the 1% annual increase for contributions. Councillor Armstrong?
I'll make the motion that we continue with the 1% annual increase for contributing to general asset management reserve extended to 2022 and 2017. That will help the 20-year investment plan recommendation to help address infrastructure funding gap. The impact will be $948,000. And that will bring our contribution to reserve up to $6.6 million. Thank you.
So the motion as it shows on the screen, is there a seconder? Councillor Geselbrock seconding. And did you wish to speak to it, Councillor Geselbrock?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I think it's important, topping this, back up to the plan. Asset management in this reserve is a critical, responsible management of our city's infrastructure, and not contributing to it and getting it to where it needs to be is just going to cost more money for people down the road.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
I concur with what Councillor Giselbrecht stated, and as well, like I look at what happened with the fires this past year in different communities, and it just puts even forward the importance that we have to have asset management being built. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, through you, Chair. I too really support this, and I appreciate staff's efforts to, whether through user fees or through the asset management reserve, to begin to address gaps in the funding of infrastructure. Largely not placing blame on the past, but past development practices, not just in Nanaimo, but everywhere, has resulted in unsustainable infrastructure in terms of the ability of the general refurbishment. And so I think it's great that the City of Nanaimo is working to address that, and I hope in Council's future deliberations around projects that we will question whether the type of development results in assets that are going to cost more in the long term.
Thank you. I'll allow that editorial. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. My editorial. I'm voting in favor of this as well. Asset management is extremely important. There are cities and towns across North America that are going bankrupt because they didn't practice proper asset management over the number of years, and I'm just glad we have a handle on it right now, and we'll be moving forward, so I'll be in favor of that.
Thank you very much. I see no other speakers on this. I'll just add that I echo those thoughts and comments. I think this is extremely important, and as I noted, I think yesterday, I think Nanaimo has been a leader in asset management, and I'd like to see us continue down that path. So on that note, I will call the question on this motion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Which brings us to snow and ice. Other way.
We need to, Chair, we need to have further discussion on the economic development, I
Oh,
believe.
okay. Sorry.
We were going to come back with
Yes,
some options.
my apologies.
Nope, that's
So
fine.
this was an offshoot of the discussion on economic development and funding sources for community engagement.
Right. So we went back and had a look, and there isn't any consulting fee or budget in the economic development cost center currently. So what our suggestion would be is there is money in the strategic infrastructure reserve. So you could take $50,000 out of that strategic infrastructure reserve and put it into an internal order to do whatever work is determined you want to do with economic development as far as options. So that would be our recommendation, is to pull some money from there and use it.
So, and I think that addresses Councillor Bonner's concern, that I think it was Councillor Bonner or Councillor Brown, that if there was a desire for community involvement and consultation, how would we fund it? And there's a possible answer. I'm not sure that that requires a motion, but it at least gives us assurance that there is funding. What's your thought on that, Ms. Mercer?
We would require a motion so we can move that money into the budget.
Okay, thank you. So I see Councillor Armstrong.
I'll make the motion that we move $50,000 into the ECDEV budget from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve Fund for the purposes of community engagement. Does that work?
We'll create an internal order.
So it'll be an internal order, okay. Whatever, Sky, do you have that? Or, sorry.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Martman. Speakers, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Can we relook at that and just put it into public engagement? Because we're going to do a lot more than just talk about economic development in the future. There's also, I'm looking at a number of products that municipalities and cities can purchase that help out with public engagement on a whole host of topics. So I'd like to see that money be used for that as well.
So I'm hearing a desire to modify that motion to make it more general. I don't know if that would qualify as a friendly amendment or not.
Make that friendly amendment if it's able to be done through internal order, is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship, if I may clarify. And the 50,000 should be, instead of diverted to the economic development portfolio, maybe to the office of the city manager, and as a place to coordinate that engagement process. And so the 50,000 would be allocated to there or the council area and more general administration, so it could be used in different places. And you need to really envisage what that process looks like as part of your reviews of committees or other things early in the new year. So there would be that would probably be the proper place to put it.
Thank you. So Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Martman, thank you. You're agreeable. Is everybody clear on that amendment to the motion then?
Just to be clear, it's for the subject of public engagement in 2019, including economic development.
Right.
Thank you.
Speakers, Councillor Bonner.
Oh, that was me.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Geselbrock. No. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I'm in support of this, but I feel like I need to have a better understanding of how, as a city, we do community consultation or public engagement kind of across the board. I'm not sure whether each department has a line item for community engagement, whether it's project specific. I'm curious whether our economic development portfolio has some engagement dollars attached to it. So I'm bringing this forward to say that absolutely I support the allocation of $50,000 to this kind of broad umbrella term, but that for me, I think we want to be a bit more strategic about how we talk about community engagement and public consultation in general, and that this will be, for me, kind of the very first baby step of how we do that. And I agree with Councillor Bonner, there are tools out there that are succeeding in other jurisdictions that might help us kind of have these conversations and kind of weigh what might work and what might not. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rudolph. Oh,
Sorry. I'm sensing another workshop, a committee of the whole. It was a long list, but that's what it's for. And so to go over those, how it works, what council's aspirations are on that, and to build a bit of a action plan around that. And that's, again, something that we could put into the schedule for early in the new year, and that fits in. So, and in addition, you would be expecting a report back from the task force and public engagement, and all that information will be supplied to you, and that would make a good opportunity to revisit it and develop your own implementation plan, and then the budget, you'll have some budget allocation to do that with.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. I'm seeing no other speakers. I'm prepared to call the question. Are we all clear on the motion? Seeing no dissent, I will call the question then. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. So now we get to snow and ice. So the recommendation is in front of us, rebuilding our reserves for snow and ice, preparing for worst-case scenario, hearing that we have basically depleted our reserve for this area at present. Is somebody prepared to make a motion regarding this topic? Councillor Geselbrock.
I move to rebuild the SNIC reserves as presented.
Moving the recommendation as presented. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Martman, thank you. Now discussion. Councillor Geselbrock, discussion?
I think having enough money in the bank for worst-case scenario, especially as climate patterns are becoming more intense, may not be next year or the following years, but we're going to want to make sure we've got money in the bank for when there is an extreme weather event, and to make sure our roads are clear for emergency vehicles and to keep Nanaimo running.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, through you, Chair, to staff. If we were to say, let's say, drop it down at ENGPW to 100,000, leave parks at 75,000, and if there was a bad situation this year, where could that money be funded to top it up? Would that come from the Strategic Infrastructure Fund again?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, that would most likely come from surplus.
Surplus this year.
Surplus?
This surplus this year.
After Christmas be different.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Need
you.
to think.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. No, I will support the rebuilding of the reserve, just because I think it's prudent of us to not have impact in future years from unknown snowfalls, et cetera, and climate change. So I'll support it as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I guess this is really a question of tolerance for risk, and sort of building on Councillor Armstrong's. If we were to reduce the addition to reserve, we do always have the option to amend the budget if we did have a significant snowfall this year. And so I would be in favor of a reduction. I'm not saying go to zero, but even if it was 0.14 or whatever the math works out once we do a similar reduction, knowing the fact that if we didn't make it through this winter or in subsequent winters, you can always amend the budget to cover the balance.
Thank you. So the motion on the floor, of course, is the recommendation as it stands. If that's not supported, then of course we can entertain subsequent motions. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not in favor of this motion. I would prefer to see these two reserves rolled into one and the annual contribution be 200,000. This would, and that it's capped at 800,000. I don't think $1.2 million in snow removal, even on when we had a really bad year in 2016, I think it only went down 200,000 because I think council pulled $200,000 to balance their budget out of the reserve from that one. So I would prefer to see it capped at 800,000, and honestly, I'd like to see the 75,000 that we don't put into this year, and there's 4 years of that, be allocated to funding another position at the city so we can get more things done.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Yes, Chair, is it appropriate to make an amendment to this motion, or is it?
I'm going to suggest that any substantive change to the motion would constitute a new motion, so unless it's a very minor amendment,
No, it's not
I think
minor.
we need to vote on this. Councillor Armstrong.
I concur with what Councillor Bonner said. I think we need to look at this a little bit further. I agree that we need to drop it down. I'm not sure the numbers, but I understand staff's concerns that we bring it up, but I do like the idea if we could fund the position. I think that is far more important right now than building that, especially if we can go into surplus if we do have a bad snow year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Through you to staff, can I just confirm that if we do reduce this by $75,000, that can be used for a staff position? This isn't one of those scenarios where you recommend against that?
Through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, yes, that would drop the amount we transfer, and therefore it could be used to drop the expected tax rate increase.
Okay, so in follow-up, I won't be supporting the motion on the floor. I think, again, like Councillor Brown said, this is about risk tolerance, and I feel like if we're able to kind of trim it in any way, this is the one that makes the most sense to me, because we can, if we have a bad winter, we can pull from places to get the roads clear. So I won't be voting in favor of this motion.
Right, thank you. I see no other speakers. I'm hearing a sense that there might be a desire for a subsequent motion, but I think we need to vote on this motion as presented. So I will call the question as it stands. All in favor? Opposed? And that motion is defeated unanimously. So a subsequent motion would be in order. Is somebody prepared to make one? Councillor Turley.
Yes, I would like to move that we add to the snow removal reserve 100,000 instead of the 200,000 for this year.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Brown seconding. Discussion on the new motion. Councillor Turley, did you wish to speak to it? Councillor Armstrong?
Is that for both? Because like for the ENGPW as well as Park and Rec, so it's 100,000 in total for both, just for engineering?
Yeah, just reduce the 200,000.
To 100,000. Okay, I'm in agreement. Thank you.
I'm seeing no other speakers. Ms. Fulla. Ms. Mercer?
Either one. Go ahead.
Ms. Fulla.
Sorry, just looking for clarification. That reduction is for 1 year only? Okay.
And I think, again, the intent is, as Mr. Rudolph has indicated, a workshop at some point in the new year on our subject of reserves and how they can be streamlined, changed, modified, whatever. Ms. Fulla?
Sorry, through the chair to Councillor Turley, just one more clarification on your motion. The 100,000 that you wish to reduce it in 2019, do you wish us to add it to a future year so that we still reach our target balance of 900,000, or are you suggesting you wish the target balance to be lower?
Well, I suggested that we reduce it by 100,000 for this year, and the motion has nothing to do with future years, so I would prefer to have that dealt with in future years. So. Oh, yeah? Okay.
So, Ms. Fulla?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. Yeah, no, I understand the 100,000 this year, but if we just take out the 100,000 and we don't add it to a future year, then are you saying you want us to stop our target balance at $800,000, or do we add that 100,000 to a future year so we eventually get to the 900,000?
I don't think at this point in time we should. I mean, we can revisit it. So we have to leave it.
So to leave it at 800? Okay.
Okay, so we're clear on that. Councillor Bonner?
And just for further clarity, I understand it is just $100,000 for this year, and we're just going to put that back into the kitty for a while until if we reallocate it or something, but we're not changing any of the other structures, so it'll be short $100,000 at the end of 5 years. Okay, and fine, drop of taxes, oh, good.
Mr. Rudolph.
Your Worship, this is effectively 100,000 off of the 4.91%. So it's new money, so I'm not sure what the number would be as a result of that. We'll get that for you, but that would be reducing the 4.91 by 100,000, which is maybe up to 0.1 or close to it.
Thank you. So I see nobody in the queue further to this. If we're all clear on the motion, then I will quote Robert Frost to say, some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. And on that note, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. There'll be a test later. Oh, dear. Right. Let's move on. We're having too much fun for a budget discussion. Number 7. And number 7 related to new positions, which I'm sure will cause some discussion. So,
I'll make the motion.
Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I want to make the motion that we approve the 2019 new positions in the draft plan as listed on the sheet.
Thank you very much. Seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Martman.
Speak to it.
Yes, Councillor Armstrong.
I've been looking at all of these really closely, as well as the requests, and it's my opinion that we need to build staff capacity back, and this is one way to do it. I'd like to put in more positions, but I think, in fairness to the public, I don't know if we can do that at this particular time, but I'm quite comfortable with the positions that have been recommended. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Just a few comments. I think I'm fully in support of bringing staff up to their full complement. I'm a little concerned that we have 3 new positions devoted to parking. And I understand from Mr. Sims when he explained the parking and street use coordinator, I'm still a little fuzzy on what that person will be doing. I see, this might be a bit cheeky, but the 0.11% of that raise to property taxes would cover out a different position coming from the same department, the active transportation coordinator. In an era, in a time, in a culture when I think we're really looking for change, and I think this community is looking for change, I think having someone devoted to supporting the implementation of our transportation master plan and ensuring that we are getting on target with emissions reductions, et cetera, we're building cities around, or we're building our city around active transportation. It promotes health, promotes well-being. I just have some reticence around funding 3 new positions around parking. I see an opportunity with a position that I don't quite, and perhaps I'm willing to say that's just my understanding of it, that I don't quite get its impact and its value. So those are just my comments.
So, Mr. Sims, if you're prepared to respond to that, I'll let you do that now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's some good comments, and as Mr. Rudolph mentioned, we have 3 positions in front of you about parking and 1 hopeful future position for sustainable transportation coordination. And I think the intent or the hope on the part of the transportation group was to fund that second position in 2020, given a similar set of deliberations then. I've just got some notes from Mr. Rose on the focus of that position. So originally, a lot of the parking sort of management issues were under the bylaw office group. There was a parking manager, in fact. That position was eliminated, and all of the issues, the calls to about parking from residents or businesses came to engineering. So that's occupying a lot of time. And so that's kind of to take the load all of these issues that come up and responses. We just keep getting these stacks of issues. I want crosswalks on 8th Street kind of questions. So that's the bulk of it, is really to generate some more policies and stuff around on-street parking. So that's hopefully a little bit clearer, a little bit more helpful. Any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. I have some other speakers. Did you wish a follow-up? Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Sims. I think you're good for now. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I also have a query about the parking position as well. But I'm wondering, does this thing on a cost recovery, like the amount of tickets we give out there, it actually pays for the position? And do we need a car? Kind of opposed to putting more cars on the road. Or can a person just bike around? Well, they can't bike around because it's not safe because they don't have bike lanes, but.
We'll have Chief Fry come and speak to that, as that falls under her jurisdiction right now.
Okay.
Tall people up here. Through your chair to Councillor Bonner. So the bylaw enforcement officer does require a vehicle. We are repurposing our license plate recognition vehicle that we currently are using downtown over to the to be used in the hospital area and the new parking system that will be implemented there. So we do have staff that are currently downtown that not only address the downtown parking, but a lot of the security issues as well. The word is called parking patroller, the bylaw enforcement officer downtown that's being funded. That's strictly a title, and for the majority of their work, they are dealing with the downtown security issues and even branching out a little bit outside to work with the RCMP. As we heard from Superintendent Miller, it's a bit more efficient to have bylaw officers rather than RCMP officers at a lower funding source. And they are also going to the nuisance properties, to the unsightly properties, all within kind of the downtown area, up to and including the Harewood area. So we do need a vehicle for them. They're going to the parks and removing a lot of the squats with the park staff and moving those on as well.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. I really want to echo Councillor Hammond's comments around the active transportation and position. Because you don't get the modern city by building the city of yesterday, or not having the emphasis, or having emphasis on techniques that were used yesterday. So I was incredibly excited when I saw Mr. Sims' presentation around complete streets with respect to the amount of transportation, active transportation infrastructure that they are wanting to complete. My question through to staff would be, could that position be used immediately? Now, I understand there was some editing around budgeting and business cases, but you know, we know the implementation of the transportation master plan has been less than ideal with respect to public expectation. We do know that we're doing an OCP, and you know, those type of things can be reflected well in the OCP as well. And we do know that active transportation is a benefit for health, the local economy, and our overall sustainability goals. So, yeah, my question to Mr. Sims is, could that job be utilized in 2019, or are we not in a position fully to implement those things?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Councillor Brown's question, is it regarding, you know, one
Which
or the other?
position?
Is that what you're? No. So both positions in 2019, is that?
The position I'm really concerned about is the active transportation coordinator. So I trust there's an adequate business case for this one. I understand the senior group, or that there was a decision to postpone the ask for the coordinator position for active transportation until 2020 budget. My question for you is, could that position be utilized in 2019 if council granted it?
Absolutely. Mr. Chair, the position would be to sort of drive programs that get more people out of cars. I think that's going to be one of the major focuses, things like Bike to Work. What's the other one that we do in the fall? Sorry, it's not coming to my mind, but sort of some of those programs for active transportation. But the suggestion, just a little point of clarification, the suggestion for the staggered positions was from the department, from the group. So they felt this was the priority, the parking and street use coordinator, and then next year, 2020, would be in priority. But we can always make it happen sooner.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
I'm in support, obviously, of the bylaws having come from the police background because they take away a lot from the police having to do that, because if you don't have that, then it's going to fall upon the police, number one. Number two, I know you're new to council, but you'll start to see the majority of complaints we get are around parking, especially in the hospital area where people can't even have friends to come to their house because there's no parking, so it's a huge issue. We don't have a good transportation system in the city right now, which allows for people to do the visiting, so secondly, the bylaw enforcement, the parking patroller, like they said, they're dealing with the homeless issues on a regular basis. If we don't have them, then it's going to fall back on our police, which I don't think is one of our best uses of police resources when they can do that for far less value. Again, when it comes to parking street use coordinators, like I think they get hundreds of complaints a day, and then that's falling on somebody that is at a higher level than what that would be. So now we're taking that resource to deal with these complaints because we do get an awful lot of complaints about parking issues. So I'm totally in support of the 3 bylaw positions.
Thank you. Councillor Turley, you're next.
Yeah, that's okay. I think mine's been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Staff, did staff wish to say something? Mr. Rudolph?
Your worship, firstly, this conversation partially got into slide 9, I think, which was new positions. So I don't know if you want to deal with them separately or all in. Secondly, we can give you an update on where the tax rate is now, so you're aware of that rolling total. It's part of your conversation for each piece. So after you make a decision, we want to make sure you're updated on that number, so you're informed as you review each slide. I think Ms. Phil's got that slide available just to show you.
I think council would appreciate updated numbers, and then my preference would be to deal with things separately, but let's have a look at the numbers if we could.
We're just going to pull the slide up here. So changing the $200,000 down to $100,000 for 2019 only, reduced your 2019 property taxes to 4.81 approximately, because as we said, we do have to go back and actually put it all in the budgeting system, but that does increase your 2020 property taxes, because now we're putting $200,000 in the reserve in 2020. So now we have that 100,000. You've shifted that from 2019 to 2020. So I just want to make you aware that it impacts 2 years, that change.
Possibly.
Thank you very much.
It could change.
So I have anything else from staff at this point? Councillor Hemmons, then Brown and Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I just want to clarify that my opposition, and that's very strongly worded. I don't have opposition to the bylaw positions at all. For me, it's about creating the city we want rather than maintaining the status quo. And for me, I think having a parking and street use coordinator, I understand, I've read the business case. Thank you, Mr. Sims, for the detail. And I have the utmost respect now, having probably just getting a sliver of what some of those complaints are. I have a lot of respect for the people who do that day in and day out. But for me, I remain steadfast in my values that we're looking to create a city that we want to live in and not just maintain the one that is currently here for us. I think we want to reach for new, and it will be challenging. And I think we have an opportunity with a really exciting new position on, it could come this year, it could come next year, but I think it's something that we really, I heard loud and clear in the campaign. This is really important to people. So I just wanted to clarify that with Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. It's tough to navigate the next slide and then also this slide, because, you know, if it came to a question of just even finding 0.1%, I would happily drop a student planner to gain that 0.1% to contribute to another position. So I'm not sure how we want to tackle that, because the decisions that we do make here might influence the decisions we make on the next slide. So I would be looking for guidance from the chair or anybody else on that.
Councillor Bonner?
I was just going to say, I wanted to talk about the snow budget, but we're getting confused here again, so I'm going to put that away. I also want to talk about the position that Councillors Hemmons and Brown talked about, but I guess that's on the next slide, so I'm just going to say I'm in favor of this as it sits right now.
Thank you. Anybody else? And I recognize that it's difficult to deal with separate issues on separate slides, and they are to some extent interrelated, but my preference would be to deal with the motion that's on the floor regarding these new positions. And I see no other speakers, so I will state that I support this fully. I indicated earlier that one of my planks was reestablishing staff capacity. I think this is a minimal step towards doing that. There's a business case for all of these positions. And regarding some of the other concerns about, with great respect, the type of city that we want to live in, the one parking patroller to deal with the hospital area, that comes from a very comprehensive community involvement of the hospital plan and what they want to see in that community, and I think it's an offspring from that. So I support that. The bylaw parking patroller for downtown, that to me is public safety, which I heard loud and clear as a concern. So I don't have a problem with these positions, and I will definitely support them. Not to say I won't support other considerations as we move forward, but I think all of these are very defendable. So I'll ask if there's any other speakers, and then I will call the question on the motion as it stands, which is the slide in front of us. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I'm curious about the $75,000, or maybe it was the $100,000 that Councillor Turley moved to remove from the snow and ice. So do we realistically now, and I feel like I'm kind of tinkering with the trains a little bit, but I would be in support of supporting all of these positions if, and I don't even know if that's appropriate to say that if we do have that extra money, that we have a really clear conversation about potentially some of the positions that were left off. And so bumping it up to, instead of 7, having 8 new positions. Thanks.
So,
Chair, through to Councillor Hemmons. This is a great question. What we just showed you was the impact of reducing the $100,000 off the snow budget was taking the proposed tax rate increase from 4.91 to 4.81. So it's not new money, it's more of a reduction in that, and and then if council wants to adjust that, it doesn't only have to come down, it could go back up. So there could be some seesawing on that rate. So it gives you that current number, so you know as you move into the next slide if there's where you sit with the tax rate.
thank you. Councillor Geselbrock.
I'm supportive of the positions laid out here, recognizing that we're needing to just bring staff capacity up to a level that is necessary. And at the same time, I would like to, in the following slide on new positions, have a fulsome discussion about how we can look at potentially moving a new position earlier.
Thank you. Again, I'm seeing no other speakers at this point, so I'm prepared to call the question on the motion as it's presented on the slide. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. And I believe next up was automated garbage refuse truck and expansion of that service for future. Councillor Armstrong.
I'll move the motion as stated to get on the floor for discussion.
Thank you. And Councillor Martman seconding, so
Speak to it.
on the floor, Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Turley.
I would like to see if staff could explore working with the RDN. I think it was Councillor Bonner had said that previously, like if they're looking at automating, is there a way that we can work together to get like a spare truck when they're, like when we had the 2 trucks go down, a lot of issues. So I would like to see more discussion around that with more shared stuff between the RDN around that particular angle. For January 2020, I'm in total agreement with that, but for the July 2022, I'd like to see more discussion around that with the RDN. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So what is the actual cost of the vehicle? I don't know.
Through the chair.
Ms. Mercer, do you have that?
Yeah, we're looking that up right
Okay,
now, so we'll
that's
get
fine,
that number for you.
Just be a second. Through the chair to Councillor Turley, we are budgeting for the truck we need for 2020, we're purchasing in 2019 because as I explained the lead time, we're budgeting $432,369 for that. And in 2022, we're budgeting just under $459,000 for that truck because of course there's price escalation. And this is based on our estimates from the trucks that we recently purchased.
So the figure of 255,000 includes some amortization on that vehicle?
So the 255 is we will do short-term borrowing for the truck. So we'll do borrowing over 5 years. That includes the debt servicing costs on the truck. That includes staffing of the truck. So you have a position, but you also have to have backfill because they have to be staffed 360, or all the days we collect garbage, which I think is 265 or something. And it also includes fleet charges, so money that goes into the reserve for the maintenance of the vehicle and the future replacement.
The
5-year borrowing.
So the question I was wanting to know is whether part of the principal for the cost of the vehicle is included in the 255,000 over an amortization of 10 years or whatever the period is, or is it all in a capital budget somewhere?
So that actually sits in, well, we don't fund amortization, but I think more what you're referring to is in our fleet charges, we amortize that vehicle over 10 years for its future replacement.
Okay, thank you.
So that it goes into that equipment depreciation reserve we talked about yesterday.
Done?
Yep.
Thank you. And again, just to be clear, and I know it shows on the screen, that this is funded from sanitation user fees.
Correct, and that was reflected in the 5 years for the user rate fees that Ms. Mercer showed earlier this morning. That reflects these changes to how we deliver sanitation services in the next 5 years.
Right, thank you. So I appreciate Councillor Armstrong's comment, which I think echoed Councillor Bonner's comment regarding talks with the RDN and possibly sharing equipment, but that's something for future, of course, and I can't predict how that might roll out or whether it would be feasible or not. But we do have a motion on the floor.
I would like to withdraw the motion because we've already dealt with this when we approved the user fees, because it's being done from sanitation. So it's not a motion that we need. We've already dealt with it.
I'll ask staff to comment on that.
So the user rate bylaw that was passed, or passed first 3 readings on Monday, was only for 2019.
So we do need this motion then?
Yes.
Okay, then I put it back, sorry. I thought because we'd already dealt with the user fees and agreed to it. Thank you.
No, thank you for
Back on the table.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you.
Your motion is back on as it originally was. Councillor Martman, you're still happy with seconding? Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Then I will call the question on this motion as it shows. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, gets more interesting, new positions which are not currently in the draft plan. Councillor Armstrong.
Could we deal with them like one by one, or maybe just pick like some, because I would actually like to deal with the temporary GIS technologist, because it is only 1 year, and we could fund it, like Councillor Bonner said earlier, from our strategic reserve, right? Because it's not an ongoing salary commitment, so I think if we maybe dealt with them, would that make more sense?
I think what we need to do, if I may, is entertain motions on any one of them or all of them, or as councillors individually see fit. But Councillor Armstrong, I apologize, I jumped right over Councillor Brown, so I'm going to let him speak first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move that the position of the Active and Sustainable Transportation Coordinator be included in the 2019 budget at the rate shown here.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Hemmons. So we're talking just about the Active and Sustainable Transport Coordinator at 0.11%. Speakers to that motion. Councillor, did you wish to speak, Councillor Brown?
Sure. I think we heard some comments from myself and Councillor Hemmons that did capture it. We are behind when we consider the initiatives being led by major cities of our size. If you go to Kelowna, if you go to Victoria, this isn't to propose the overhaul that they have done, but it is, I think, an important position if we do want to slowly work towards the goals of our transportation master plan and get a modal shift in folks out of their cars. I am not anti-car. I do know there is a place for it, and there's going to always be folks that need to drive. But we do know the benefits from an economic perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a health perspective, if those that want to get out of their car and take other modes of transportation have the option to. The question is not about those hardcore bikers that we see going up Bowen Road, or it's about the average person feeling comfortable to use their bike or to walk on roads. And if we do not emphasize that, we will not get a city that is developed that respects those user groups. So I think this is a very fundamentally important position for moving our city forward and making sure that these issues are on our mind.
So I'll put you down as undecided. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is part of our conversation of how do we turn the direction of the ship that we're now captaining. So I'm very much in favor of the idea. I would like to see it funded, though, from some part of where we're funding reserves on an ongoing basis, which what I mean is that, as an example, we have $125,000 going into the Sustainable Initiatives Reserve, and it's going in there for the next 5 years. So if we were, because this is an operations and we're talking about reserves, my idea is to take it out of something that we're putting into a reserve for the next 5 years. So this position would then be funded completely for the next 5 years and not impact our budget whatsoever. So is that an option in that specific reserve? And it may not be, but there are other reserves here that we're putting money into, and the question is, do we need to put that much money into that reserve?
So before Ms. Mercer speaks, and she can correct me, my understanding of the intent of the motion as it stands would be that this would affect taxation. And to Councillor Bonner's comment, I think this comes back to the larger discussion which we need to have on reserve funds. Mm-hmm. And I'm just not sure that we can delve into that right now or make a decision based on tinkering with reserve funds to fund this position before we have that other discussion. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm not comfortable going there at this point myself. So I'll let Ms. Mercer give her interpretation, and we'll see who else wishes to speak to it. Ms. Mercer, did you have something?
Yes.
Or no?
Sorry, yes. And I think there is a bigger discussion that needs to happen with reserves. We can, Ms. Fuller was looking at what was being funded from that sustainability reserve, but I do think a bigger discussion has to happen on reserves before we start making some changes to that.
In a slight follow-up, we already just did, because we just changed our snowplow budget. So I'm not opposed to your suggestion. This is just a way to add a really good position I think we really need and not jack our budget back up again.
Okay.
But I'm willing to look at that later on in the year.
Yeah, thank you. I have Councillor Turley, then Armstrong, then Geselbrecht. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am having trouble supporting a motion like this because my goal is to get taxes down to 4.75%, and this is going the wrong way. And I also, some of the other issues I look at is transportation is partly through the RDN, Parks and Rec, looking after trails, and I'm having trouble understanding what this position would add to that.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if Mr. Sims could give us some clarification or information on this, the specific position.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this position would do a number of things, I think, sort of drive some of the events around cycling, for example, the Bike to Work Week. It would also look at other partnerships with, say, the school district and encourage our next generation to get into cycling, so to normalize cycling to school and, you know, just have that educational piece so that as that generation grows, they are already in that mindset of cycling is an optimum way to get to work. Do I really need a driver's license when they get to 16? Sort of helping facilitate that educational process. So it's sort of furthering the goals of the Nanaimo's Transportation Master Plan and just moving that forward. I think some of the other councillors that have spoken to it have spoken eloquently and supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
fine.
that's okay. Thank you.
I'm still not convinced, but that's okay.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I'm with Councillor Turley. I think this is a nice to have for right now. I know others will disagree with that because that's their vision that they want to push it forward right away. I would like to revisit it next year. I think that we have more pressing staff needs right now and that this could be on our budget for next year. I think it's a great thing, but is it a necessity in a budget year where we have to significantly raise taxes? In my opinion, no. I heard from a lot of people who are the exact opposite of what you guys have heard, where they feel too much emphasis is put on that. So I guess it's a different demographics. But I do think we do have to have better active transportation. I agree 100%, but I would like to see that in next year's budget. Or, as Councillor Bonner said, perhaps we could look at finding different ways of funding these positions. So to me, it's not a necessity, so I'll be voting against this one and would like to see it in for next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Through the chair, I think developing our active transportation systems and increasing people engaging in that and reducing our dependence on, single-use vehicles is absolutely critical. I think that we are under the gun in terms of transitioning to more of that reality, just to reduce our carbon footprint. I'm curious, I'd like to know what is the most important next step in terms of moving in that direction, whether it's a position to hold events, and if event coordinator in active transportation to get people out is the most important thing that we need to be doing in terms of moving in that direction, or is it focusing on building infrastructure like bike paths that are going to get people between, the hospital and downtown and that. And I'm not 100% sure on what is the most immediate direct investment to move that agenda forward. I think exploring, in the short term of this year, is there ways that we can possibly do this without raising taxes? I think that's an important one, and I'm not entirely clear on, say, for example, if we're not putting $100 a year or $100,000 a year into the snow and ice removal, and we reduce the reserve down instead of $900,000, have the reserve at $500,000, if we can pull out of something later on, does that free up monies to support that position? And also to this, there's a big chunk of money in this emissions, strategic emissions reserve that would be very applicable to this type of position. And I'd like to explore that, and I understand that that is potentially part of a conversation around how we're working with reserves. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rudolph?
Worship, I'm sounding like a bit of a broken record, but I think we need to have a half-day session at Committee of the Whole on the subject of transportation, where we're at, what the plans say, what committee structures exist or don't exist, not only us, but elsewhere, and kind of review that, because you can certainly move the dial forward on the subject matter, and we are engaged in this process already with some capital and so forth, so it's not as if it's not being dealt with, but the best way to deal with this subject is to get it properly on the table so you have a fulsome discussion, briefings and all the important documentation, including budgets, and then see what can be done, even if there is no position dedicated to that with you. So I don't think all is lost on the file. It's just a matter of using the tools that you have at your disposal at this time to deal with that. So I think you know, the position is only one element of that.
Thank you. Councillor Martman, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. So if I understand this correctly, because we're doing this draft budget for approval, so if we did not pass this motion right now with the 0.11%, there's nothing that stops us as we get more understanding of our reserves and the use of the monies. There's nothing stopping us from adding it on in February or March back into the budget.
Through the chair to Councillor Martman, yes, that is correct. You can pass the provisional budget and then come back with changes in the new year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There seems to be a lot of talk about pulling money from reserves to fund positions. I think in the, and we'll probably get to it, the temporary GIS technologist, that can make sense because it's potentially a one-time cost. But, what we're talking about here is operations over the long term. And if, I'm kind of getting nervous about all this talk about reserves and using reserve funds for, that was a criticism of the last council. I think we need to be a little cautious of that because it is also not best practices in most cases. So with respect to the position, this will be sort of my last comments on it, but this will always be a position that we choose to cut unless we actively want to be that type of city that is progressive and moving forward. And I actually don't think it's a nice to have because we do know modal shifts can result in the transit system gaining more user fees and becoming more, have better cost recovery. If you do it right and get people off the roads, you can have lower maintenance costs, you can have less people on the roads, less needs to widen roads, and over the long term you can see a lot of infrastructure savings. So it's not just about lifestyle choices, it's also about, which I alluded to, the economy, health, and all those things are wrapped up in it. So that's my last comments on the matter. I just hope this doesn't become a position that's always considered a nice to have, and then it's bumped in perpetuity because it's always in the pursuit of a low tax rate, which is important. It's important to have responsible taxation, but it's also important to have the taxation rate respect the values of your community.
Thank you. So I have Councillor Bonner and Councillor Armstrong, and then I think unless there are any first-time speakers, I'll be inclined to call the question. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you. I'll be voting in favor of this motion. I think it is a must-have position. It will change our future. And no, with all due respect to parking folks, that'll just make things nicer for the next few days, sort of thing. But I think this is really important that we do start this position and then it gets proper funding. My question to staff through you, Chair, is Councillor Martin suggested that we could add this in afterwards if we do an interim budget. Can we do it the opposite way of add it in now and then find money later on after we have our conversation about reserves? And then at that time, lower the taxes. I'd rather see it go in and then we find the money later, and so that taxes aren't going up, than not put it in and put it in later when we find the money. I think it's that important. And lastly, to the question of reserves, most of my thoughts on reserves is not putting as much money into reserves as opposed to pulling stuff out, although there is one reserve here I want to talk about. What the idea is putting less money into reserves, not getting rid of the reserves, but not bringing them up, some of them, as fast as we are. That was my only point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
I hear what Councillor Brown says, and I agree. I don't think we should be funding long-term positions out of reserves or anything like that. My concern about this position is that we don't have the infrastructure in place to support it. We hear constantly that our Parkway Trail is not used because it's not in good shape. So we're going to create a position, yet we don't have the infrastructure to support it. We don't have good bike lanes, so I think those need to come first before we want to put people out onto roads where we don't even have the infrastructure to support doing that. So that's one of the concerns I have around that. Secondly, I have a concern around the fact that cyclists and all that aren't licensed and they can create accidents and there's no mechanism. So that's something I want to explore further later for this community, that they should be licensed and insured if they're going to be on arterial highways. And I do appreciate that we want to get a more active lifestyle, but if we don't have the infrastructure to get people out to have the active lifestyle, and we don't have a bus system that supports our community, and we're working on that through the RDN, I don't think we have the options yet to get people out of their cars. Like, there's a few, but so I think we're putting the cart before the horse in this. I think it's something that we could look at next year. So I'm still going to be opposed. Thank you.
So I was suggesting I would call the question. I see Councillor Geselbrecht wishes to have one final brief comment with new information that we haven't heard.
Through the chair, thank you for this opportunity to say one final word. I am supportive of this position. However, I would like a more fulsome conversation on a strategy and understanding where we're at with active transportation, so I can be convinced that this is the best step forward in investment of money. It's not a matter of, the 1.1% for me adding to it. It's just what's the most pragmatic, effective way of moving the dial forward and getting people out. And until I have a briefing on the plan for this, which was suggested by our CAO, I am not able to support immediately adding this position to the budget right at this moment, although I'm very open to it in, adding it to it before we do the final budget talks in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Geselbrecht. So I see no other speakers, and I am going to call the question on this. Before I do, I'll just comment that I think Councillor Armstrong expressed my thoughts. For me personally, I think there are other priorities, and so I'm not able to support it at this time. So the motion is to add the Active and Sustainable Transportation Coordinator. Impact is estimated at 0.11% to our 2019 property taxes. So I'll call the question. All in favor? All opposed? And I see Councillor Turley, Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Geselbrecht, and Councillor Thorpe opposed. And so it is defeated on a tie. Thank you, Ms. Snellgrove. So that motion is defeated. Good discussion, everybody. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's points and valid comments. Councillor Armstrong?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to have the temporary GIS technologist for 1 year, and that could be funded from reserves, which reserve? I'll refer to staff on that one. Strategic, because it is only 1 year, so it's not something that's going to go, and I think that would really help that area to get caught back up. So that's why I'd like to do that.
So your motion is the temporary GIS technologist for 1 year and funded from strategic. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Brown. Ms. Snellgrove, do you have that captured? Thank you. Ms. Mercer.
I would recommend that with the temporary GIS technologist, if you were going to add it in, be funded from 2018 surplus, and we can put that money aside from this year's surplus into the reserve to pay for that position.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. So Councillor Armstrong is making that amendment to her motion. Councillor Brown is seconding that. Thank you. Discussion. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to staff. Please forgive me, we've had a lot of information coming at me. Can you remind me, the GIS technologist, who they work under, what their mandate is? Is this an asset management piece?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, the GIS technologist falls under the IT department, and I don't have the information off the top of my head, but they would be used to make improvements to our current GIS system. We had a large GIS review last year in 2017, and my understanding is that this position would help move forward some of the recommendations and asks out of that review.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Yes, just to, through Chair to staff, this, just for clarification, this will put the tax rate that we decide on today back up by 0.1%, and then once we know what the surplus is, and then it goes back down. Is that how it works, or how?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. No, it would be, the impact to taxes would be zero for 2019,
okay.
As we would have enough surplus at this point to fund this position temporarily next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing no other speakers at this point. Any other discussion regarding this motion? So I think we're all clear on the motion. I will call the question then. All in favor? Opposed? That motion passes unanimously, so we have voted to add that position to the budget coming from last year's surplus. Are there any other motions from this slide forthcoming? Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I'd like to move the motion that we put the recycling policy advisor in place. It shows that there's no impact to our tax base, so whatever's included in there, so that it's there. I think that's an important position as well, if it doesn't have an impact on increasing taxes.
So the motion is to add the bottom bullet. Seconder, Councillor Martman. Discussion, Councillor Bonner.
Actually, I wanted to talk about something else.
Reserves?
Yeah, no, I had...
Next speaker.
You didn't notice my button before you...
You're right, I didn't. I apologize. Well, if you're going to be that way. I'll let Councillor Turley speak.
Yes, so I just want to confirm that when it says no impact, we already passed the sanitation user fee rates. Did those rates include this position at that time, or is?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, Ms. Fuller will review.
Speak to this.
Mr. Sims.
So Ms. Phil is going to provide a more fulsome answer on the funding of that position, but one thought that we had was, as noted, it's the 3 Rs contract is already set aside within the sanitation budget. The potential exists to acquire additional funding for this position from the regional district, and or to share perhaps like 1 day a week with the regional district under their educational budget for sanitation.
Thank you. Councillor Turley, anything to follow up?
Well, I'll wait for the answers. So.
Okay.
We're just reviewing the budget for sanitation, our backup for the user rate fee. We believe for 2019, because the addition is so small, we can make it work within the existing rate for 2019. We'll have to go back though and crunch some numbers. It may impact sanitation user rates in the next 4 years marginally for the increase, but we can make it work with the $170 that you did first 3 readings on for 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Negotiations with the regional district on their sanitation, is that, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
I think having a recycling and policy advisor is a very important function to have within the city. I know that money before was being used for the Nanaimo Recycling Exchange for the 3 Rs contract. And currently the Nanaimo Recycling Exchange is reorganizing itself, and I think that there's a larger discussion that needs to happen in waste management, in solid waste management between the RDN and the city, and nonprofit organizations that are working towards recycling. And I think at the moment, allocating that money at this moment to in-house policy advisor is a little bit premature before necessary discussions have happened. And so I would like to have a workshop to look at our recycling systems, so that we can see where it at and where's the best area to allocate that funding in order to move the dial. And I think that would just be premature at this stage, although I really do appreciate the sentiment and the need for it, just to do it wisely. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rudolph or Ms. Fulla?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on Council Geselbrecht's to make it clear that, yes, when we say we can make it work, that would be using the 3R contract money to help fund this position.
Thank you.
Just in case I wasn't clear.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Based on what Councillor Geselbrecht has stated, I will vote no now and wait until we get a more fulsome report and review from the RDN, and then, because it's something that can always be brought back since it doesn't impact budget. So I can either withdraw my motion if people want, or I'll just wait for the vote. Thanks.
I'd suggest we wait for the vote. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I see no problems moving the position forward as presented, especially because we don't know what the NRE plans to do. We don't know around future education. So if it is something we value, I think we should really consider doing it ourselves.
Thank you. So we've heard good comment, and I see no other speakers. So unless there is any other discussion, the motion that's been moved and seconded is to add a recycling and policy advisor funded from sanitation user rates. Councillor Geselbrecht?
Yeah, I'd like to speak a little bit more on that. I think there's a lot of different moving parts between the RDN and solid waste management. I also think that there is a large group of people in the community that also are working to organize, and I think there's a lot of information that we don't have yet to make a decision to allocate these funds, so that I would really advise council to not rush into creating a position until, and wait a couple months before all that information is presented. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
I just need some clarification, Chair, from staff. So this year, it's not going to have an impact, but will it have an impact in the future years? Because, there's no point creating a position this year that doesn't have impact, and then all of a sudden we got to find dollars in the future years to fund that position.
Through to the chair
Struggling.
to Councillor Armstrong, it will have a small impact in future years because there will be, well, this year the impact is $26,000. We'll have to inflate that for future years. So there will be a small impact in future years, correct?
And I guess, follow up if I may, because the budget's coming by the 3 Rs contract. That could stop tomorrow if the government decided, is that correct?
No, the
No?
3 Rs contract
Or am I
is
mixed
our
up?
contract for.
Okay, so it's not on the recyclable
Yeah,
piece. Sorry, I was
that
mixed
we
up.
give up, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Martman, and you might have the last word.
Thank you. So for clarification, because I believe this is a good position to have, but is it easier for us to not decide on the position today and add it in a couple of months, or add it in and then remove it?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Through the chair to Councillor Martman, I would say it's a lot easier if you held off adding it and had more discussion and then add it if you so choose. That's less, just from a practical point of view, of less work of having to put it in and then potentially take it out.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I see no other speakers, so I think it's time that we called the question on this. And I will indicate that I'm going to basically bow to the expertise of Councillor Geselbrecht in this area, and for that reason, although I support in general principle the idea, I'm not going to support it at this time. So I will call the question. All in favor of the motion to add the position? Opposed? Councillor Armstrong, Martman, I need to record Councillor Geselbrecht, Councillor Hemmens, Councillor Thorpe, Councillor Turley. That motion is defeated. Thank you. Now, are there any other motions coming from this slide? Councillor Bonner.
I have a question and then a possible motion after that, if I may. Through you, Chair, to staff, it's back to the snow budget. And I believe Ms. Fuller mentioned something that it would impact our budget in 2020, but I don't understand that because all we were doing is taking 100,000 out of this one and then continuing the 200,000 in 2020. We weren't changing anything.
Through the chair to Councillor Bronner. So the reason that it impacts 2020 is currently we had $200,000 budgeted in 2019 and $200,000 budgeted in 2020. So now you've reduced the budget in 2019 by $100,000, but the budget in 2020 is still $200,000. So now we have to pick up that extra $100,000 in property taxes to fund the difference, because we have a property tax level that's sitting at here now in 2019, and the difference between here and 2020 is now $100,000 greater. I may not be explaining this well. I'm thinking from a counter's perspective. I think Mr. Rudolph wants to jump in.
There's an option there. It's not, if we use the same funding philosophy for the snow removal, we would have the position of trying to make that up or add that. So it's not an automatic, it would be a review process for next year. But if we're using the target that we're using for funding that reserve, then yes, what Ms. Fuller is saying is true. There's the way we're budgeting for that reserve account would have an impact on the next year, but it doesn't have to happen. It's just I think she's saying there's a compounding implication for this. So you can deal with it in a one-year increment, but to make it up, I think what you're saying.
Not exactly. With the $100,000 reduction that you did for 2019, now the target balance for the Engineering and Public Works Reserve is $800,000, not $900,000. We didn't add that $100,000 in a future year. It's about the difference now between the property taxes we collected in 2019 and 2020. We've now reduced the amount of property taxes we're collecting in 2019, but we haven't changed our costs in 2020. So now we have to make up that difference. This is hard to explain. So that is what pushes that property tax increase up in 2020.
I understand now.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Visuals help, right? Need a little levels here.
Councillor Turley.
So I'm still confused.
It's all about percentages.
So what I don't understand is I would have thought, and when I made the motion, that there was just a one-time removal of 100,000 from that, which then down the road reduces it to the 800,000. Okay, so I don't understand now why we're having to add for next year, or for 2020. I'm a little thick, I have to agree. It's okay.
It's sort of, I wish I had pen and paper here. It's sort of like, say we were collecting $20 this year and we're collecting $30 next year. So we had to collect an extra $10 to get us from our $20 to our $30. Now, this year, instead of collecting $20, we're collecting $10, but we still have to get it at our $30. So now our difference is $20 instead of $10. We've reduced the money we have now in 2019, so that means the gap between 2019 and 2020 is bigger. So because we didn't change the funding level for 2020, it increases the property tax in 2020. I hope that's, it's probably clear as mud.
Assuming we keep the money for the 2020 budget
At 200,000, yeah. But now we're only capping, now we're only rebuilding the engineering and public works reserve to 800,000, not 900,000, because you didn't ask us to extend it or add it into a future year.
So unless there's further clarification on this subject, I'd like to go back and entertain any other motions that we can speak to.
I want to speak to this. I did.
There we go. Go ahead, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. So if I understand correctly, really what it is because there's targets that have been set. And because the targets have been set, that's why we have to make up that difference. If we choose as a council to say, as Councillor Bonner talked about in our reserves, perhaps we want to make our snow removal a reserve target of 500,000. So that's why the difference has to be made up, and we could reduce our targets if we so willed. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I know that we're going to be talking about reserves before we pass the full budget, I'm guessing, so that we will be able to, like, this will be a provisional one and we'll be passing that after we've had a conversation about reserves and all the money that's in there and that sort of thing. Is that an understanding?
I don't know what the time frame for that workshop would be. I don't know if Mr. Rudolph can answer that either.
Well, I think, Your Worship, we need to clarify the date for the provisional budget adoption, which is 17th of January. That is the scheduled. No, we're
17th of December.
December is for the, in principle, which is the 3 readings, but the provisional would go into January. So there is a period there. How that, I'm not sure we're going to have an opportunity to schedule a workshop on reserves in that short period of time that would inform you sufficiently. So there's just so many topics, and there were other topics as well that we needed to get in front of you. So if council, so in terms of process, as a result of today, which the idea was to get through this and end up at a number, and it's some decisions around all these decision points, and that will inform staff to prepare the bylaws that come forward to the December 17th open council meeting here to decide on that tax rate increase. So then that would be moved to final reading or the provisional budget adoption in January. So and then there's a subsequent step later in May after all the numbers are brought in. So I wouldn't encourage council to get too involved in tweaking the budget and doing things through that first 5 months. It might be difficult to do that and sets kind of a bad precedent. Also, we need to have some solid footing from an administration, what our budget is that we're working with and what we're doing and how we prioritize projects and that type of thing. So the original question is, how do we schedule in a process to deal with the reserve issues globally so that we would inform this year's budget? And I'm not sure we're going to be able to accomplish that effectively in the time that we have available unless we really schedule some extra meetings. So I guess I'm saying is I don't believe we're going to have an opportunity to do that before the scheduled provisional budget adoption in January.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciate your forthrightness in stating that, Mr. Rudolph, and I have to say I agree. I just don't see that the time is there. So I guess to answer your question, Councillor Bonner, I can't give assurance that we'll have time for that full discussion on reserves.
Okay. In that case, I would like to make a motion that we take $1 million out of the uncollected tax reserve. And I've had a conversation with staff about what this reserve is about. I think for a risk management point of view, it's overfunded, and that we apply that money to a number of other reserves, thereby lowering our taxes by 1%.
So Councillor Bonner is making that motion. Is there a seconder?
Second for discussion.
Councillor Armstrong is seconding. Did you wish to speak to it any further at this point?
Yes, please. This particular fund is, from what I understand, came about a number of years ago when cities were worried that a large taxpayer was going to go delinquent on their taxes. As an example, a large mill or something along those lines. I don't believe that we're in that position anymore as a city. I don't think we have one large entity that is paying a good chunk of our taxes. We're spread over a much larger area. Therefore, the risk of losing $2.5 million in taxes is not an issue. So I think it's an overfunded reserve, and therefore that money could go into other reserves because, and I'm raising it now as an issue because it doesn't look like we're going to have the conversation I thought we were going to have in the time that we need it. I do understand that by lowering our taxes, we're going to implement our future years, but I think that's something I can live with, and we will then have an opportunity between now and next year to have a fulsome conversation on our reserves and see exactly what we're willing to do and what risk this council is willing to take. I fully support and understand where staff is coming from this, but we as council are elected to look at these things and take the risks that we think we need to move forward. So that's why I'm putting forward the motion.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Turley, you're next.
Well, I was on a different topic, but
We're on this motion right now.
I know, but I will ask one question of staff through you is with reference to mills, that's one thing, but other large properties such as Woodgrove Mall, roughly what do they pay a year in taxes, approximate?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, Woodgrove Mall is, if not our number one taxpayer, it's within the top 5.
That's all I need to know, that's okay.
Are you good then, Councillor Turley? Mr. Rudolph?
There's a fair amount of clarity that would be needed around this, the intent. So this $1 million is a one-year thing, which would mean, pardon me? So I'm not sure how that gets sorted out in terms of the intent. That is, if it's reducing this year's tax, we're covering the costs of expenses by using monies out of a reserve account to cover 1 year's worth of expenses, 1 million or 1%. Then that would presumably impact year 2 and 3 and so forth, because it's a one-time impact in on the budget. So the other thing is, again, I'm not fully. I'm as new to this as you are in terms of our own reserve accounts, and I would feel it helpful to have a full briefing on all the reserves, how much, the sustainability, all that, and the purpose, and then right-size those reserves as a result of our meeting in January, if we could schedule it that time. So I'm not sure if Ms. Phila would like to comment in terms of perhaps the mover can explain their intent with that and how they understand that would roll out post next year's budget, because there's different ways to skin that. And I think there needs to be a fair amount of clarity around that, or we could come back and give you a report on what we understand the impacts would be.
I'm going to go to Ms. Mercer. You have something to add?
I just wanted to add that this particular reserve is part of our discussion in, or our how we're restructuring our new reserve policy. So it all plays into that and how we determine what reserves we're going to create. And one of those reserves is having a certain amount of operating money set aside. So I think the best practice is 3 months of operating to be kept aside for emergencies. And we will need to build up our reserves to get to those balances. And this plays a part in creating those balances of the new reserve structure that we are going to propose. But we won't be coming back with that until probably the end of Q2. So that, I just wanted to add that. But we'll have a discussion about reserves. We can have a discussion before that, but just wanted to give some context to what kind of work is going involved in our reserve policy that's being created.
All right, good information. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I can't support the motion at this time. I think we need to have the reserve policy review done before we do that. I would like to have more information where all our reserves are. I do have concerns about, because we do have some big employers here, like BC Ferries had challenged their assessment, and it was reduced considerably, is my understanding. So we had to rely on that tax fund. The malls are a concern too, because there's a chance that some of them could end up going bankrupt, and that's a significant amount of tax dollars. Like I look to what's going on at Rutherford, and we don't know what the owner's going to do there. So I would rather wait till we have the conversation and have staff give us a fulsome report on the impact removing different reserves to different reserves would have before I could support a motion taking any money out of reserves for that to reduce taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councillor Brown and Turley, but I also see all three staff positions, so. We've reduced it to Ms. Full, and I'll let you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind Council, if you looked in your tab 1, page 25, you can see we have there your projected reserve balances. You can see that in the next 4 years, our reserves are not building up. I'd also like to remind Council that I did caution you that I know $103 million seems like a lot of money, but between 2007 and 2017, 97.2% of the contributions we made to operating reserves we spent. And it's really critical we have healthy reserves for emergencies and opportunities. So I just would like Council to consider this while they're thinking about this motion.
Thank you. So I have Councillor Brown, Turley, and Bonner in that order.
Thank you, Chair Thorpe. I can support the motion as is. For one, it would always be nice to have more information, but two, even if we were to move some of the funds that are in this reserve, I don't think it's appropriate to be using them to lower taxes on a one-year term. That impacts our future years, but it also we do know that we do have some depleted reserves. So if we are to be moving them around, I would rather see them, in my opinion, be more responsibly used to supplement some of the reserves that we could benefit from having more full.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. I too cannot support the motion. I prefer to wait to see that, as Councillor Brown said, that maybe there's a way of moving some of the reserves to other reserves. I also don't think it's politically smart, because this was one of the ways the previous council got their tax rates down, and we said we wanted more transparency, and I'm not convinced this is very transparent. So.
Thank you. And Councillor Bonner. Yes, Councillor Bonner, you're next.
And I reviewed this fund for the last 7 years, and it never really went down very much, maybe 100,000, never really went up 100,000. So it just seems to be there's $2.5 million of taxpayers' money sitting there that may or may never get used. And I look forward to the conversation we're going to have in the future. Part of my motion was that this fund wasn't used for operations per se, but was reinvested into other reserves, so that the annual amount of money that we're putting into those reserves was covered by this $1 million. So it's $1 million going from one reserve, being able to reduce taxes for 1 year and move into another reserve. And now that Ms. fully explained, by lowering taxes, we will affect our next year's budget. I'm okay with that because what I was trying to do was level out the increase over a couple of years as opposed to having a larger one this year. And that was my thinking around this thing. It was, we're leveling out the field. So that was my points.
Thank you. I see no other speakers, so I will state that I didn't support last council dipping into reserves, and I can't support this until we have that greater discussion. So I will not be supporting the motion as it stands. And I see no other speakers, so I will call the question. All in favor? All opposed? Councillor Fuller, Brown, Thorpe. Oh. Sorry. Oh. Now do you feel better, Ms. Fuller? Sorry. Oh, I know you'll get even. I'm sorry, Councillor Bonner. Opposed was Councillor Turley, Councillor Brown, Councillor Thorpe, Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Geselbracht. I didn't see your vote, I'm sorry. Councillor Martman, Councillor Armstrong. So that motion is defeated. Okay, I'm obviously losing it. Is there any other motions that people wish to make? Councillor?
I don't have a motion, but I have a question, Chair, through the staff. On the page on key budget drivers, there's an item, other changes, 268,000. Can somebody elaborate what that is, please?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, there are the $10,000 up here, $5,000 there, because, I mean, there's hundreds of lines to our budget,
Yeah.
and they all go up and down, and I would bore you to death if I went through pages and pages of, we adjusted this budget by $5,000.
So there's no room for adjustment on that adjustment?
No, because they're all little, yeah, you'd be taking, oh, let's take $100 out of this person's budget, let's add, yeah.
Anything else from staff at this point?
There was just two more slides with regards to positions.
Did you have something else, Councillor Turley? No, I can wait. Okay. All right. Go ahead, staff.
So there's two more slides relating to positions that were not added into the budget. And I didn't know whether there was more discussion on positions. There was the two from Parks and Rec and one for Public Safety here, as well as the ask for more firefighters.
So is there anything on either of those two slides that council wished to move a motion on? Councillor Armstrong?
I want to put the 4 career firefighters positions on the table as outlined in the position for discussion. Second.
Seconded by Councillor Martman. And Councillor, I'm sorry, I still see staff. Is that? Thank you. Councillor Armstrong then speaking to it?
After hearing from the chief, I would like to bring our fire contingent up to full staffing abilities where they can meet their targets. So I know it's a significant increase, but again, it goes to the public safety. They've had a lot more things to deal with, especially with the tent cities, fentanyl issues. We heard that she's got 5 off right now, so I think those bodies would help. So I just want to put that on the table for further discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Thank you, and I as well support, I think as part of our public safety, they're first responders. I look at some of it is offset by savings of an overtime reduction, and I just feel that it's in the best interest of our city to be able to have as full complement as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. So the mention that there's currently 5 staff off, or firefighters off on leave. I'm assuming that their remuneration would be from WorkSafe BC, or is it is the city still paying them when they're off?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. Oh, sorry. Here, no, go ahead.
Chief Fry.
Thank you. So currently, the ones that have been approved through WorkSafe at this point in time, there will be recoveries from WorkSafe up to 75%, but they are still topped up through their employee wages. But again, our sick leave is very high within our fire service, if that assists. And those recoveries generally come through at the end of the year back into the system.
Thank you. Councillor Turley, anything else? Councillor Hemmons then.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Chief Fry. Are we contemplating 4 firefighters because that's a full crew? Like, would there be an option to reduce that number?
Correct. The 4 would be 1 per shift, so it wouldn't be a full crew. It would go on to shifts. We do have flex firefighters. I believe we have, I'm going to say 8, could be 9. We have 8 flex firefighters that are there for we use those firefighters really to do the day-to-day staffing and backfilling and be able to move for short-term illnesses, but we are getting longer and longer with aging population and fit-for-duty requirements. So it would be 1 per shift is what it was, but definitely it's council's option if they would like to look at other numbers on potentially not 4 at a time, but reducing that to 3 in the first year and another new one the next year, or even less too. It'd be up to council.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yes, follow up.
If I may. Do you know the ratio in Nanaimo to career firefighters and paid on call, and where that ratio sits comparable to communities of similar size?
Through the chair to Councillor Hamlin. So the makeup of fire departments across the province as far as composite and career departments, so that most cities similar to our size have either reduced their on-calls simply for the fact of retention. It's very difficult, and training standards for those on-calls. So there has been a new act or new requirements called the Playbook from the Office of the Fire Commission, which are mandatory requirements for the on-calls. And again, with the collective agreement with the firefighters, our on-calls cannot perform the work of the career firefighters. So they technically can't arrive first on scene in the city and be dispatched to fires as a first on scene type of apparatus. We do have similar cities. Abbotsford has a large on-call percentage, Township of Langley also, but places like Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam have reduced all of their on-calls to 0. And it's simply for the fact of retention and ability to maintain their training standards and ability for employers even to allow them to respond to incidents during the daytime.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
I'm just going to those that are on OSI injuries. When they come back, if they can't come back to full firefighter duties, is there a place for them in the city where they can help, or within the fire department, or how is that working?
Correct. Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, we've actually been working really well with our union to have a light duty. So a lot of times as part, if it's a physical injury, getting them back to work sooner, and they'll help out in our inspections branch, which also does public education and outreach. And then it's a newer transition, and there are changes with stress-related injuries being back. Like anybody, we want these employees back and fit for duty and back to their main role as soon as we can. But with the processes, and as you know now, WorkSafe has approved stress-related injuries as a compensable injury.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief Fry. I'm seeing no other speakers at this point. Does anybody else have a question or comment? So the motion is moved and seconded. It's, as it shows on the screen, addition of 4 career firefighters, impact property taxes 0.16%, supported by a business case. If there are no more speakers, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And I note Councillor Turley and Councillor Hemmons opposed. That motion passes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, is there anything else we wish to discuss at this point? Ms. Gurry, disguised as Ms. Snellgrove.
So I just wanted to let council know the process for these recommendations to be approved. So because we're at the Finance and Audit Committee right now, they'll come to the special council meeting on December 10th for approval and then be included in the December 17th council agenda in the bylaw.
Thank you very much. So that's a good reminder. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. I am a bit concerned about now we're back up to just under, shade under 5%. I'm wondering if there's any possibility for staff to look. I'd be more comfortable around 4 3/4, and I don't know if there's an opportunity to get to that point at this time or whether that comes after we find out what the surplus from last year was or is.
I don't know if staff can reply to that right now. Ms. Mercer?
We will be coming, as I mentioned before, to council on December 12th at the Finance and Audit Committee. With the quarterly report that will show an estimated surplus. At that time, you could allocate, or if at the end of the year we still had a surplus, which I assume we will, you can allocate some funds out of that at that time.
Okay.
So.
Thanks.
But.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I probably could remind Mr. Turley, you could have dropped a percentage off that, but he voted against it, but I'm not going to take it personal. But do we have a number that the man behind the curtain can tell us?
I agree on the number, so.
Click your heels together 3 times.
And of course, I just want to caution you, this is an approximation. We do have to go back and put it into the budgeting software, but this is where approximately we will be.
Down a bit.
So the main number we're looking at is the bottom one on the left-hand column, 4.97%.
Yeah, so you're now looking at 4.97, 3.58, 2.89, 2.62, and 1.5.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner? Did you?
I'm all done.
No? Thank you.
I think we need, Mr.
I'm
Mayor, I
seeing
think
no
we
other
need some.
speakers.
I would
Mr. Rudolph?
advise that, I think there's a motion in order, or is this just going forward as an information item to the 10th of December? What's procedurally, what would be are there any motions required today?
No, these motions will come forward to the December 10th special council meeting for approval.
Okay, so I was wondering if you wanted to have a motion that reflected the 4.97, or if that was kind of where, or do you want to leave it until Monday?
Well, I recognize that Monday we'll be dealing with all of the topics again. I guess personally I would be more comfortable with a blanket motion to approve the changes that we have talked about today, voted on today, with the resulting bottom line number.
Yeah.
So if somebody could make a motion to that effect. Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Bonner seconding, Ms. Snellgrove writing it down. Just to basically summarize what we've decided today. Sorry, I didn't have your microphone on. Could you just repeat that?
That the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that council approve the draft 2019 to 2023 financial plan with the changes listed today.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrock, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, through the chair, I'm just to staff. Just curious on clarity on procedure of accepting this budget. The next chance that we have to make amendments or for further discussion would be December 12th, and then the provisional budget's passed December 17th.
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock, there is opportunity at the Finance and Audit Committee on the 12th. That makes it, any changes at that point makes it tight for us to get a bylaw in front of you for the 17th. But there certainly is opportunity for discussion at that point, if you so choose.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll call the question on that motion, just to confirm what we have voted on today. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. I would like to thank everybody for their good discussion today and a good morning's work. Thank you. Motion to adjourn, seconded by Councillor Martman. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.